I'm so glad to see you on my channel. This story begins in the year 2077, when the video game apocalypse became a terrible reality. The world order was destroyed forever. Chaos filled everything around, and there was no escape from it. Magical abilities also awakened in people, which helped them in the fight against monsters. In Jian City, there lived one of the strongest young masters named Ye Xiao, who protected his beloved Yaren. At the same time, he helped her hire more than 10 experts to help her improve her skills. The teenager also spent all his savings on various weapons for Qin. For many years, the young man provided her with the best, limiting himself in almost everything. And soon the girl became the strongest gold-level hero in the land of dragons. After some time, they finally had their wedding ceremony. It was an incredible event. Many envied them and could not take their eyes off such a charming couple. Unexpectedly, the young cultivator asked her if she would marry him. The girl hugged him and stroked his head pitifully without answering. Everyone present could not understand what was happening, just like the main character himself. A moment later, Yaron completely refused to marry him, which completely shocked everyone. At the same time, Qin, with a lightning-fast movement, tore his heart out of his chest. He stated that all his gifts could not buy her favor and force her to marry him, adding that everything she achieved was due to her hard work and he had nothing to do with it. At that moment, a big man approached her and hugged her. The young lady announced that she would marry him. The extremely arrogant Zhou stepped on Ye and said that he was just a nobody, after which his body was simply thrown into the lake. Xiao could not accept such a betrayal. After all, he, in turn, did everything for Qin so that she no longer needed anything. In those moments of weakness, the boy swore to himself that he would not allow her to treat him this way. From then on, hatred settled in the teenager and did not give him peace. The young man dreamed of only one thing: to return and take revenge on the traitor and her henchmen. While pondering his brilliant plan for revenge, Ye didn't notice how he returned to a life where Yaren refused to take money from him, saying that everyone was already laughing at her. A stunned Xiao remembered this moment. It was a week before the apocalypse. So the guy was really reborn. Qin continued to tell him that his pennies would not save the situation. For a long time, the young man could not believe what was happening, ignoring the girl's displeasure. Suddenly, Ye approached her and silently looked into her eyes. Businesslike, Yaren asked why he was looking at her like that. The teenager said that she never really thought of him as a normal person. A puzzled Qin asked what he was talking about and what was going on. As a result, Xiao agreed to no longer give her his money for small expenses. Yaren smiled back and said that he had strange jokes, and she was ready to take a couple of hundred from him. However, the self-confident teenager urged her not to bother him anymore and left. A stunned Qin began to shout after him, declaring that he would soon regret this. Suddenly, Yi turned around and began to take off her shoes, claiming that he was the one who bought them for her. The girl continued to rage, insisting that no one needed his pennies, and that she would no longer forgive him. Xiao in turn asked her not to catch his eye. Besides, he really didn't have time to prepare for the apocalypse. Before the game testing began, the young man hurried to collect as much money as possible. As a result, he decided to sell all his shares to Lin and called her to offer a profitable deal. The amount was 20 billion, and the girl became interested, and Yi asked her to do everything as quickly as possible. Lin kindly agreed to become the new owner of his corporation and transfer money to his account. Now Xiao had to wait for the project to beta in order to climb to the top of success on his own. After a certain amount of time, the test finally began, and the guy rushed to try it out. The game instantly transported him to a rather familiar location, which Yi immediately recognized. Without thinking twice, the teenager chose a new nickname for himself, Knight Xiao, and began to play. This time, he also chose the Demon Tamare class, which was different from his previous role. After all, in his past life, Ye skillfully wielded a magic staff, playing the role of a magician. Now he had enough resources to allow himself to become a real master of beasts, after which the young man immediately replenished his gaming balance with a large sum of money. Thus, he had more than 20 billion gold coins in his account. Moreover, he knew perfectly well that in just a couple of days their price would increase tenfold. In addition, the system awarded him a secret profession called God of Wealth. This was a real pleasant surprise for the teenager. He had never thought he would be so lucky. Xiao believed that now everything would definitely work out for him, and Yaren would crawl to him on his knees. Suddenly, a monster appeared in front of him and said that he did not expect to see a child. A puzzled Yi asked who he was and what swamp he had jumped out of. The beast suddenly introduced itself as a wealth mentor named Abisu, and Xiao was shocked. However, the main character was quite skeptical about his mentor in the form of a frog. The toad immediately demonstrated its incredible abilities, having rewarded the young master with a huge number of different skills. The system reported this. Ebisu, in turn, noted that all these talents would help him become richer. The young animal tamer began to understand that with them, he would really get rich very quickly, which couldn't help but make him happy since it was extremely easy to increase money. But the most important thing is that he didn't have to do anything for this. At that moment, the system welcomed him to the newcomer village, where there was practically no one, because the game had just begun, and therefore E had the opportunity to get ahead of everyone in development. However, the monster tamer didn't have a starting weapon, which became a real problem. And so he needed to develop some kind of strategy, while demons rushed towards them. These were only level 5 goblins, but they were an elite force. The frightened Xiao didn't know what to do, fight the monsters or run away. Ebisu in turn began to run away and recommended that E do the same. Naturally, he understood that this was truly the only chance for salvation. Soon the boy and his mentor arrived in the main city. The rest of the people who chose the warrior and archer classes only mocked Xiao and his pet, claiming that becoming a beast tamer is the most reckless choice in this game. Wandering through the alleys of the city, the young man declared that he did not want to be content with simple demons. Ebisu suddenly said that there was a god-level egg in the dragon's lair, but when E arrived at the Supreme Hall, the pet noted that at the first level, he would not be able to hire a guard to go into the cave. However, the extremely self-confident teenager stated that he could trust him. But suddenly he was met by an archmage who asked for a letter from the Lord to be here. She said that he didn't have a letter of introduction, but he came to return the item to the magician. The old man urged the guy not to joke with him and to speak frankly or to leave the room. He suddenly scattered several gold coins and the magician naturally noticed them, after which he began to collect them all together. The young man continued to throw him more money. Having collected several hundred gold coins, the elder was simply delighted. Then, of course, he kindly admitted the honorable guest to the upper floor of the Supreme Hall. However, the teenager asked him to return to his menacing manner of communication. Once inside the stunning castle, they began to look around. Suddenly, Ye discovered the level 100 warriors and began to examine them closely. Ebisu declared that with their help he could capture the newcomer's village. But suddenly an unknown warrior called out to them. Bloody Berserker asked Xiao who let him in, and the guy said that he needed a divine level guard golem. The knight replied that with his first stage he would not be able to hire such a high-class fighter. But E said that he was ready to pay 1 billion a day for these services. The shocked warrior literally froze in place, not understanding where the boy got so much money. Then the bloody berserker remarked that he knew of a magic caster who could help him. Xiao liked the idea of hiring such an incredible master, especially since the spellcaster was also a hidden class. At the same time, the knight urged the young man to sign the contract and pay 1 billion. Soon a young girl appeared and asked who had called her and why. Seeing her master, she introduced herself as Dolores and said that she would carry out his orders all day. She also asked what exactly E wanted and who needed to be dealt with. She said that he hired her for an extremely important mission, and the girl only laughed in response. Having said that he could defeat anyone, the teenager then decided to test her abilities. A few minutes later, they headed out into the wasteland, where Rez began to run amok. By destroying hordes of low-level goblins, E successfully received money and experience for this. Soon the young sorceress eliminated absolutely all the monsters. Eyewitnesses were simply shocked by such incredible figures and thought that the game had been hacked. Meanwhile, the young man reached level 10 without doing anything at all. Just watching Dolores burn away demons naturally, rumors of the incredibly powerful newcomer spread throughout the area. Xiao thought that his preparation had started off quite well, because very soon people's real lives would turn into hell. The billions spent on a divine-level sorceress paid for itself quite quickly, after which they set off on a long journey to the lair of the dragon that E needed to eliminate. At this time, one of the players continued to improve himself by destroying goblins. It took him a long time, and he couldn't figure out how E had reached level 10. Moreover, he had never heard of the young master and his successes before. The main character and his team were heading to a rocky area, where a young beast tamer discovered a magic stone and pressed his hand to it. As a result, it shattered into pieces, and a stone crypt immediately appeared from under the ground. This cave was the dragon's lair. Even Ebisu was surprised by such a find. Dolores noted that if there really was a dragon here, she would not be able to cope with it. But Xiao urged them to just look around, as he had heard about a level 100 knight disappearing in this dungeon. The teenager also knew about the existence of a certain dragon egg, which he needed to obtain. Tao and Ebisu began to complain, saying that it was more difficult than killing a dragon. But E urged the witch not to be modest, because she was of divine level. After walking through several long corridors, they finally came to a huge monster, which lay on a large mountain of gold. Dolores decided to use the teleport. But Ye asked if they had a chance to defeat this demon. Tao stated that they would not be able to crush such a powerful beast. However, Xiao believed that they would succeed, but Rez even refused a large reward. The guy asked to buy him time, and claimed that there was no need to fight him. But she refused once again, saying that they had no chance against such a monster. But E suddenly offered 3 billion. In the end, Dolores agreed because money can persuade. At the same time, Tao could distract the dragon for no more than 3 minutes, which she informed him about. The young man hastened to apply positive effects to himself and his team to make the fight easier. A moment later, the sorceress began to distract the huge demon. The girl constantly attacked the monster, thereby not giving him the opportunity to deliver a crushing blow, after which, using her magical abilities, Rez pierced him with an ice arrow. Meanwhile, the teenager carefully approached the dragon's egg, trying to steal it, knowing full well that if the monster discovered him, it would certainly be the end for him. Tao also reported that she had practically no strength left, and that she could only hold out for about a couple of minutes. But the egg turned out to be quite heavy, and Xiao asked Ebisu to help him. The mentor replied that he had never done anything like this. Suddenly, a crumpled helmet of a dead knight fell on his foot, and the pet became terribly frightened, experiencing extremely painful feelings. The noise made the dragon turn around, and he saw a boy dragging his egg. Naturally, the monster lost his temper and began to attack him with the frog. They immediately rushed to the exit of the cave in shock. He even forgot about the weight of the egg. As soon as they ran out of the dungeon, Dolores hurried to close the entrance to the cave. By blocking the passage with ice blocks, she tried to barricade the dungeon. To prevent the dragon from getting out, however, he still managed to destroy the ice wall. After which, the demon directed his furious flame towards them. Xiao, Tao, and the toad continued to run away. At a certain moment, an explosion thundered behind them, and they were thrown back by the shockwave. Thus, they were finally freed and were able to save the precious egg. The girl noticed that there was a small 5th-level dragon hidden inside it, which could be considered a victory. The sorceress also urged the young man not to forget to pay for her work, and the boy stated that she would receive everything, after which he finally set about freeing the beast in the shell to find out who was hiding inside it. By pressing his palm against the egg, the teenager caused numerous chips. The end result was that the egg literally burst open, and Ye and Tao instantly stepped aside. Then they discovered an extremely strange dragon that was different from its ancestor. The puzzled boy couldn't understand why he wasn't glowing like the shining monster. The main character looked at the cub for a long time, trying to understand what had happened to him. Dolores was also puzzled by its appearance, not knowing what kind of reptile it was. Soon, the young master, using the system, saw the dragon's characteristics, which exceeded all expectations, as he possessed incredible skills and strength. The young monster tamer also rushed to give him a name, and due to his coloring, E called him Green Baby. But Xiao suddenly noticed an unknown object in the mentor's hands. Taking a closer look, he thought that it was some kind of emblem, but the young man did not know what it was for, or why it was needed. Taking the badge from Ebisu, the teenager began to examine it carefully, and suddenly Tao said that it was a sign of rage of the level of catastrophe. Moreover, this item had the ability to impose positive effects. The enraged pet called on Ye to immediately return the badge to him, and naturally Xiao took it for himself. The mentor in turn agreed, but only if the young man would give him 10,000 every day. The teenager began to say that they were friends and should not behave like that, after which he calmly hung the emblem on his jacket. Unexpectedly, the system gave him a secret task. He needed to find the Fang of Fury, which he immediately asked the sorceress about. Dolores stated that it was a true assassin's dagger, forged from the fang of a void beast, and it was clearly connected to this icon. But since they spent a lot of time, the program determined that they would soon exit the game. Because Xiao had exceeded the daily limit, Rez, in turn, instantly generated a teleport and said goodbye to the boy. He understood that the Doomsday game had not integrated into reality, and therefore it was really better for him to take a break. The next day, the video game became one of the most discussed among players. But there were also those who didn't like it at all, and some countries blocked the game altogether. At that moment, Yaren suddenly wrote to him, asking him to come to the hospital and pay for Khan's treatment. In return, she said that she would forgive him for the recent incident, which naturally, he had no intention of doing. However, Qin herself thought differently, believing that he was still suffering without her, and would do everything to try to get her back. Zhou also knew very well that Xiao had always loved her, and thought the guy would definitely come. By then, the doctor came into the room and urged them to pay the bill, as it was time for Hong to be discharged from the hospital, adding that their hospital is overflowing with people whose organs are failing due to the Apocalypse video game. Joe then asked Yaron to pay the bill so he could continue playing, but the girl said that Ye hadn't given her anything this month. The stunned young man asked where she had put so much money, but the cunning Chin immediately changed the subject. She stated that when Xiao showed up, she would do everything to get him to give her a bank card. Meanwhile, the teenager was sleeping at home when suddenly the alarm went off. He opened his sleepy eyes and realized it was time for him to return to the video game. Finding himself in the same newcomer's village, Xiao, of course, woke up his mentor, who in turn was extremely dissatisfied with this, after which they began to think about how they could quickly move forward. The other players were shocked by the 10th level E and tried to befriend him, asking how he managed to achieve such an incredible result. As a result, the main character began to run away from the persistent players, and they immediately rushed after him, believing that he would lead them to their secret location, where they can easily increase their level, while the number of newcomers to the game is growing. Having reached the 10th level location, they finally stopped, realizing that the path to this territory was closed to them. Thus, the young master and Ibisu broke away from their pursuers. After a certain amount of time, the young beast tamer reached a huge castle, where a certain knight stopped him and said that he did not belong here, and it was better to leave. But Xiao declared that he intended to pass the promotion test, and the puzzled guard asked how he had reached level 10. And where is his team? But he said that he plays himself and he doesn't need anyone. The knight tried to dissuade him from going alone, but the extremely self-confident teenager thought otherwise. Finally finding himself in front of the gates for the test, the guy began to think, because a window with a choice of difficulty appeared in front of him, where the abyss was the most difficult variation for passing the test. But despite this, the young man decided to try his luck and chose the abyss level. The guard was simply shocked by the player's courage, and at the same time stupidity, believing that he was finished, because no one on the 10th level could handle this challenge alone. However, Xiao believed that his new positive effects would play a key role. He also, of course, relied on the green kid, whom he immediately released. Moreover, the dragon had a mythical rank, and none of the local inhabitants could interfere with it. After a certain time, the silhouette of a wolf began to appear from behind the bushes, and Yi paid attention to it. It was a snow wolf, which was also on the 10th level and was quite dangerous. The dumbfounded Xiao immediately called on Green Baby to deal with him, while he himself backed away. The dragon looked like a mere insect compared to the beast, but its fighting spirit knew no fear. As a result, he began to emit fiery flames at him, which was a very good idea, because he was able to take away several thousand health from him, leaving him with nothing. However, even with this, the wolf did not give up, and soon fell into a rage, which gave him strength. Xiao understood perfectly well that now his health had been replenished, and the dragon would have a hard time. But the little monster seemed to be afraid of no one or nothing, which of course surprised its owner. Using his superpowers, the green kid literally shook the earth, which allowed him to stun an opponent who was superior in size and strength. Then, taking advantage of the moment, he once again released a furious flame at him. Thus, the demon single-handedly dealt with the wild snow wolf. Thus, the dragon exceeded 4 whole levels, which became a reason for jubilation. Absolutely all of his indicators increased, as did he himself, and on top of everything else, he acquired a new skill. After which Yi moved on to choosing the trophies obtained from the defeated wolf, which became a bow and a dagger. The joyful Xiao instantly took all the new weapons. Even Su did not expect such luck. But their rejoicing did not last long, as another enraged beast approached them. This time, the Abyss Tiger's stats were much higher than its predecessors. Without thinking twice, the teenager ordered the green kid to defeat the ferocious monster. The dragon immediately rushed towards the tiger, who in turn also rushed towards him. At the same time, the main character understood perfectly well that the demon was much stronger than the previous one. The young master's brave new pet was not at all afraid of him. What he demonstrated in full measure was that it seemed he never felt fear at all. Soon the green kid defeated another beast and earned his master new weapons. But this was not enough for the young monster tamer, and he decided to go to the local boss. By that time, the dragon was at the 7th level, and Ye believed that they would succeed. Moreover, the ruler was at the level of a lord, which should not have been a problem for them. As he descended the stairs into the abyss, Xiao kept saying that he and Ebby would help Green Baby defeat him. At that moment, the system notified the young man that he had entered the abyss, and there was no way back. He understood that he had made many mistakes in his past life, and he needed to change everything. Finally entering the arena, the teenager called on the Lord to appear and give him a fight, who in turn sat on the throne and waited for a suitable opponent. However, he was at the king level, which Xiao never expected, and the boss lacked strength and agility. But his abilities were unknown to him, which made the young man think. Then he realized that the Lord of the Abyss was not actually causing physical damage at all. In this regard, E called on Green Baby to use his skills only on his command. It was also necessary to constantly change positions and not engage in prolonged combat with him, in order to be able to wear out the opponent, which is what the dragon began to do. But by releasing a furious flame at him, the monster did not achieve the desired result. It seemed to the King of the Abyss that the fire did not cause any damage at all, but Xiao urged his pet not to stop, because in this case, the demon could not use his abilities and gradually lost strength. At that moment, the thug turned his attention to the teenager and even turned in his direction. However, he stopped moving. E suspected something was wrong and called on everyone to be on guard. The skull on the Lord's staff suddenly lit up, and everyone realized that he was about to launch an attack, after which he raised it up and began to spew out magical stones. Everything around started to explode, and Xiao instantly jumped to the side along with Ebisu. Then the monster once again directed an attack at E. The frightened youth again retreated back, realizing that if this continues, he will not last long. Green Baby attacked the boss again, spewing out a huge amount of flame, which finally defeated the demon, and he fell to the ground with a roar. It seemed like the entire abyss was shaking. Extremely dissatisfied, Ebisu urged them to go into the dungeon without him next time. Meanwhile, Xiao received a good reward for passing the test. The dragon was able to rise to the 10th level, and suddenly Ye declared that his mentor was a real coward. A dumbfounded Su asked, if Xiao wasn't like that, then why was he the one who ran away from the boss the fastest? Very soon, news reached most of the players that the guy had completed the Abyss trial. At the same time, the main city released a world ranking, which E topped. Some were outraged by the newcomer's sudden success and decided to find out more about him. They soon learned that the boy was in the city of Jian and decided to conduct their own investigation. At this time, Hong and Yaren also started playing this exciting video game. Joe stated that they needed to make friends with professional players in order to level up faster. He also urged his wife to ask Xiao to lend them some money, but she refused. At the same time, Qin asked him to take their current lack of money more seriously and not concentrate on some game. However, Hong continued to beg her to call the young master to borrow some money. He also knew about video games and could help them, but Yaren said that they could have a good time without him. Meanwhile, the protagonist received a special fragment from the Lord of the Abyss. The young monster tamer in turn had never encountered such stones before, after which, Xiao hurriedly left the newcomer village to finally head to the central city. Approaching the guard, Yi asked him to send him to the main city. The knight was in shock, because the teenager really did go through such a difficult test at the level of the Abyss. Then he opened a portal to a new location, and he also gave him a certain token to visit various cities. He was also awarded an epic badge of valor, which Yi gladly accepted. But the most important thing is that this emblem raised all the characteristics of its owner. Soon, Xiao and his pets followed through the portal to finally reach the central city. Windleaf was a huge and beautiful settlement for more advanced players. After which, Yi rushed toward the square for a change of profession, where it was suspiciously quiet. The guy said that he needed to find the hunter Gutal, and the surprised Ebisu asked why. After all, he himself is a demon tamer. The young man replied that he would soon find out everything. As soon as Xiao found him, he asked the old man to help him change his profession. However, for unknown reasons, Gutal urged him to leave and find another mentor. But the boy said that only he could help him become a beast whisperer, and the elder asked him to prove his strength. This required bringing 100 wolf puppies' eyes, but the teenager refused to do so. He stated that he had something that would help convince Gutal. A moment later, Ye took out his emblem and showed it to the elder, who was shocked. The old man immediately jumped up from his seat and asked how he managed to pass the test at the level of the Abyss. Xiao, proud of himself, noted that he didn't have a team, and he defeated the boss himself. Gutal instantly changed, declaring that the young man was indeed extremely talented. Ebisu said that he was a rather strange person, and he was capable of changing his mind in a split second. Unexpectedly, the elder expressed a desire to look at the beast with which Ye had passed the test. Then Xiao easily showed him his green baby, and the old man said that it was a divine dragon, adding that he had never actually met such a demon in his life. However, he also noted that the boy would not be able to become a beast whisperer. But besides this, he gave him a letter of recommendation, which had to be taken to the royal trapper. To do this, it was necessary to go to the royal city to find this man. Xiu knew that he would need to spend a lot of time to advance to the hidden class. But besides this, he had many other things to do. Su asked in surprise what he was talking about. He noted that he needed to complete another hidden mission, and Ebby again asked how he knew about so many missions. Suddenly they met Queen Cheryl, who was walking around the city with her guards. One of them immediately blocked the teenager's path and asked who he was. The boy bowed to the princess and asked if she needed help. Without thinking twice, the girl declared that if Yi found her lovely flower, he would be extremely grateful. Naturally, Xiao promised to do everything possible to find the missing flower. Thus, the teenager was able to easily receive another secret assignment, noting that if she really needed a flower, they could simply go to the flower bed. But Yi said that she needed an unusual flower, otherwise this mission would not have happened at all. Then he asked Xiao if he knew where to look for this plant, and when he approached the tool store, he said that it was here. Going inside, the young man asked the shop owner if he sold chests of jewels. The young man smiled and said that this was indeed the case and that they even contained the bones of ancient dragons. Then Yi asked to sell the most expensive chest. The guy immediately brought him a huge box. For this product, he asked only 30,000 gold coins. Realizing that one would clearly not be enough, the teenager expressed a desire to buy all the boxes. The stunned salesman literally froze in place, realizing that today was his day. After which he began to open absolutely every chest that contained weapons. In the second box, he was lucky enough to receive a large healing potion. In the third chest, he actually found bread that grew, which was quite strange. After several hours, the last 100th box remained on the table. The teenager immediately opened it and finally found what he wanted, which made him immensely happy. It was that very crystal flower, so the task was completed. All that remained was to take this product to the queen, which he hastened to do. Meanwhile, the princess was taking a bath and thinking about the mysterious stranger. Who volunteered to find that very magic flower for her? She suddenly asked her assistant if he could find it. Liz replied that he would definitely be able to do it, and a couple of minutes later she ran back to the queen, having reported that the young man wanted to meet her, and claimed that he had brought her a crystal flower. A moment later, the girl got dressed and went out to meet the teenager, asking if he had really found the same flower. Xiao handed her the chest and urged her to see it for herself, and Cheryl was surprised. After which she opened the box and indeed found her favorite flower. Then the princess asked what he wanted as a reward, money or artifacts. The girl in turn smiled sweetly at him and asked what he wanted then, because she no longer has anything worthwhile to offer him in exchange for the flower. The stunned teenager literally blushed and for a moment seemed speechless. Then he said that in reality he just wanted to get citizenship. The system instantly reported that Xiao had finally won the young lady's favor. Cheryl immediately ordered Elise to bring her the seal and prepare the relevant papers. He also asked her to help him buy a house in Windleaf, and the princess, of course, agreed. He handed her a map where he indicated the approximate location of his house, but she objected to him, since this area was less busy. However, Xiu said that this was exactly what he needed, so Cheryl ordered him to contact real estate agents. A puzzled Abisu asked why he bought a house in the western part, and not in the eastern part, where literally everything is in bloom. The guy explained that monsters would soon attack the city, and the eastern part of Windleaf would suffer the most. And that's why he doesn't want to buy a house there. The frog finally fell silent. Thus, the protagonist once again confirmed his choice, which he informed the queen about. However, Sue objected again, asking how he even knew about the attack from outside. The young master said that he was living a second life, and had been to these places before, and even more so, knowing about the impending catastrophe. All this seemed quite suspicious to the toad. Soon, Ye acquired 340 residential units and 184 commercial properties worth more than $1 billion, after which the young animal tamer paid for this service, and the queen presented him with a certificate of citizenship. At the same time, she declared that from now on, he was a first-class citizen of the Dragon and Phoenix Empire. Ebisu noted that even lords would find it difficult to achieve such an honor, and the boy was incredibly lucky. Then Xiao asked the princess if she knew the royal demon Tamer, adding that he would like to know more about it and the corresponding tasks. Sophia mentioned Ster, who could help the teenager, and E, in turn, thanked her. The guy kept calling her Milady, but suddenly she asked him to call her by her first name. The system immediately reported that the young man was on the 11th level. The notification about Xiao's first-level citizenship was displayed on all video game servers, and players were shocked, not understanding how they could achieve such a result, and who could even rise so high. Naturally, Hong and Yaren also saw that Night Xiao had bought himself a place to live, and had access to some privileges. Qin, in turn, noted that if they had really become friends with him, they would already be at the 5th level, because at the moment they have great difficulty dealing with one goblin. The team was horrified by the girl's impudence and declared that they were doing all the work for her, while she was lounging around, and if she doesn't like playing like that, then she can leave. Joe tried to smooth things over, but Yaran ruined everything again. Qin immediately left the team, and a stunned Hong urged her to calm down. He stated that now they were left alone, and it would be much more difficult for them to improve their level on their own. But the girl was more worried about why her boyfriend didn't stand up for her. Joe immediately began to apologize to her, after which he once again asked her to write to Xiao so that he could help them in the game. She finally agreed and hurried to leave the video game. Hong didn't try to dissuade her. Then Yaron finally set out to find E and ask him for help. Soon, Chin sent him a message asking him to register for the game and help her and Hong. However, after 5 minutes, the teenager still hadn't answered her, which made her think. After opening a conversation with him, the girl was shocked that he removed her from his friends and blocked her. Enraged, Yaron swore that she would never humiliate herself in front of him again. Meanwhile, the young man looked at the eastern part of the city, realizing that very soon its western part would become just as beautiful. After which, E went to an appraiser to identify his unique items. The master hastened to inform that he only values higher silver equipment. Then the teenager showed him a dark gold pendant and asked if he could appreciate it. The stunned shopworker looked at it and realized that it was indeed a worthwhile item. Xiao was also interested in the success rate of this subject's assessment. The young man said about 80%, but it would cost 100 coins. The guy laid out all his dark gold items and asked to have them appraised as soon as possible. The appraiser immediately carried out the necessary procedure with the amulet and found that it was quite expensive. E encouraged him to continue evaluating things, hoping that at least one of them would be worth a lot of money. The shopworker in turn understood that the young master was quite rich. While appraising various items, he dreamed of literally striking it rich with such a client. Thus, the satisfied protagonist left the shop, having significantly increased his characteristics. Ebisu noted that the young beast tamer could now clear territories single-handedly, which is what he set about doing, rushing towards the dark fog location, where there was a huge number of animals. Su was surprised and said that the monsters here were level 20 or higher, so it would be difficult to deal with them. But Xiao didn't think so, and immediately sent Green Baby into a merciless fight. The dragon easily burned down crowds of hyenas, leaving only scorched earth. Meanwhile, he calmly decided to have a snack, waiting for his pet to finish everything. Ebi said that he really knows how to enjoy life. After a couple of hours, Xiao finally raised his level, which made him extremely happy, understanding that if everything goes well, he will reach level 20 in a few days. While wandering among the corpses of hyenas to collect trophies from them, the guy suddenly came across a scroll. Picking it up, he discovered that it was a fireball spell. The teenager was surprised. Even though Su said that he, as a beast tamer, didn't need this skill, Ye still decided to learn it. After which he decided to check how strong the spell was, and therefore he released a flame towards the hyena. However, the damage was too small, which he never expected. Ebi only laughed in response. He said that at this rate it would take him a very long time to get to level 20. Of course, Xiao himself understood this perfectly well. He soon noticed the time. Knowing that beta testing will start very soon, and everyone will be forcibly immersed in this world. And a few hours later, black clouds hung over the city and thunder rumbled. A strong wind arose and players began to be thrown into the game in pairs. The bewildered people couldn't understand what was happening and why they found themselves in a video game. With each passing minute, the number of players increased, and they began to ask each other about the sudden entry into this dimension. However, no one could answer this question. At this time, Yaron and Han also got into the game. Taking the opportunity, Joe asked Chin whether she had written to Ye to help them. The furious girl declared that she no longer wished to talk to him and intended to turn to Night Xiao. Han, extremely surprised, asked if she really knew the strongest player in Apocalypse. Yaron replied that she would meet him soon, and the players in turn could not understand why they were unable to exit the video game. And even when the monsters overcame them, they also had no way to leave the virtual world. Then the people decided to find the best player named Night Xiao to help them. After a while, some players began to panic, realizing that they were stuck here for a long time. Badong asked his subordinate if they had managed to find this player. The guy replied that he was already at level 12 and had left the newbie village, but they couldn't find him. And Chen Kuang was only at the 4th level, so he also couldn't help them. Rushin urged his protege to use any means necessary to find Night Xiao. Suddenly, the system informed E that he needed to come to the Duke's estate. The guy didn't expect that information about the royal tamer would appear so quickly. Budong's henchmen informed him that they still hadn't found a way to exit the game. They also failed to find the main character, who seemed to have disappeared into thin air. However, Rushin ordered not to waste time and continue the search for such a powerful player, because without him they have extremely little chance of survival, so they needed the guy. Dong never thought that there would be such a capable player in Jian City. The young master, in turn, was on his way to the Duke's estate to finally meet the royal trapper, because the young monster tamer dreamed of discovering a secret class and becoming stronger. Upon entering the castle, Xiao immediately noticed Queen Sophia in her new dress. Sharelle smiled sweetly at the teenager and remarked that she missed him very much. The stunned guy became embarrassed and instantly blushed, saying that she was also glad to meet them. After which the young man immediately asked if there was any news about Stir, but the girl said that he still had not returned from his trip. However, he left him a notice to open a class, which required going to Fenye City. Xiao thanked her for her help and asked where exactly this city was. Sophia said that it was located in the mountains outside the city, where a powerful dragon lived, and beneath his lair is hidden an underground labyrinth, which E, of course, knew about from his past life. However, the strange thing was that previously there was only a level 80 boss there, and soon the young man set off on his journey, but Cheryl declared that he could not go alone, because this was level 80 territory. The teenager assured that he was not afraid at all, and that he had his own unique methods. He added that with a lot of money one could defeat any dragon, especially since Tao was a master at it. In this regard, Xiao immediately called Dolores to ask for her help. A couple of seconds later, the girl emerged from the portal and asked who needed her help this time. Seeing E, she smiled and asked if he really missed his sister. The guy said he had a job for her and it was fighting a dragon again. Rez immediately refused to participate in this mission, as she still had not recovered from the previous battle. However, E knew how to persuade money, because if she agreed and helped him, she would receive 2 billion. But Tao still decided to postpone the expedition, while Xiao declared that he knew the location of the Holy Spirit. A stunned Dolores immediately began asking him about the sacred spring. The young man said that if they set out on their journey right now, he would definitely bring her to him. But the restless sorceress continued to ask where he was, the guy answered, on the Lost Island. After which they finally headed towards Fenye City. Sophia only followed them with her gaze, realizing that this teenager is truly an extremely capable person who could one day become a divine warrior. Meanwhile, a team of new recruits tried to resurrect their comrade, but he did not come to his senses. They were horrified by the fact that the one who died in the game also died in real life. Xiao, Rez, and Ebisu continued their journey into the mountains. Su noticed that there was no dragon here, but Tao said that it wasn't that simple and that they needed to avoid fighting regular monsters. After a certain amount of time, they finally came across a huge dragon. But E assured that he knew where the entrance to the dungeon was, and the demon would not notice them. Thus, they went around the mountain from the other side, and came out to the entrance of the cave. The dragon actually didn't notice them, and thus they were able to calmly enter the dungeon. But before that, the magical gates had to be opened, but Dolores didn't know how to do it. However, the self-confident teenager said that he would personally take care of this issue, making a small cut on his palm. Xiao sprinkled blood on the stone gate. The magic sign on the door instantly lit up red, and Rez and Ebby were shocked. When asked how he knew how to open this teleport, the guy only smiled in response. The main character naturally knew about this labyrinth, since he had been here in a past life, but he decided not to tell his team this, especially since there was no need for it. So the young beast tamer ignored his comrades' questions, and they went inside this dungeon, but the mysterious feeling did not leave them. After all, it is unknown how many more secrets this mysterious young master still holds, who constantly talked about having his own methods. Suddenly the system started a countdown to find a way out of the cave. Otherwise, after this time, they could remain in the labyrinth forever. They only had 3 hours. A frightened Dolores asked E if he was really going to go into that pitch darkness. A puzzled Xiao asked her a counter question. Was such a high-ranking witch really afraid? Naturally, she answered negatively, pretending to be an iron lady, and suddenly the young man asked if she had camouflage magic. The businesswoman said that even when she was a newbie, she never used it. However, the teenager very convincingly urged her to use this ability to hide her aura. Yi then reported that there were 5 terrifying monsters in this dungeon, 3 of them at level 60. The surprised girl asked how he knew about this. Xiao again answered that he just knew a little about this place. Soon they reached a certain point where there was a trap and 3 reptiles. The guy urged her not to attract their attention and to pass by them. Dolores was indignant, having said that she had been through a huge number of caves, and it was not for him to teach her. But when she saw Xiao walk past the level 60 demon, she realized that Ye was truly no ordinary person. Tao soon followed after him and passed the high-level monsters. A moment later, they found themselves in front of ruins, where it was suspiciously quiet. The teenager called on everyone to prepare for battle, as there was a boss in the middle of the destroyed building. However, the guy didn't know what level he was, which Ye asked Tao about. The girl said that the demon was at the 100th stage. At the same time, she placed a positive effect on him, which increased his defense. After which the young man rushed towards the chest. He also urged Su not to move, so that the monster would not notice him. After a couple of minutes, he finally managed to get to the box where the hidden class scroll was supposed to be. But when the guy opened it, There was practically nothing of value inside. Xiao couldn't understand why the treasure in the chest had changed from last time. At that moment, the huge brute noticed him. Dolores immediately used her ice attacks, urging the teenager to run away immediately while he still had the chance. He and Ebisu immediately rushed in the opposite direction from the enraged boss. Tao continued to attack him with various abilities to buy time for her teammates. Lightning suddenly pierced the body of the huge demon, but he still stood on his feet, after which Xiao decided to find out what kind of crystal he got. It turned out to be a restoration stone, which had the ability to reset the recharge time of any skill. Rez in turn asked him what they should do with this big guy. He urged her to use all her strength to finally defeat this monster. Then the girl began to unleash a barrage of her magical blows on him, which was extremely painful even for a level 100 boss, but it seemed victory was just around the corner. However, at a certain point he started screaming loudly, and no one could understand what was happening. Suddenly, a huge dragon broke through the ceiling and rushed to help the giant. As soon as he appeared, he immediately began to emit a furious flame, and everyone began to run in different directions. The main character was shocked and did not know how to escape from such a powerful beast, who continued to attack the young demon tamer with his team. As a result, the young master, Tao and Su, began to run away, the cave literally shaking from the blows of the monster. At the same time, Dolores could not understand how Boss Yin could summon a dragon. Running away from him to the end of the dungeon, the embittered thug continued to chase them. But suddenly he got the idea to fight the boss, and besides, the dragon couldn't keep up with them. Confident E stated that he wanted to test his magic along with the Restoration Stone and the Mark of Valor. Pointing them towards Yin, the teenager naively believed that his attack would be simply incredible. But subsequently, the fire beam took away only 240 units of health from him. A stunned Xiao couldn't believe that the damage was so small and simply meaningless. But a moment later, the damage increased significantly, and the brute instantly collapsed to the ground. It was like a critical hit with a bleeding effect which helped bring down the monster. At the same time, the guy's instant death skill was activated, since the demon had less than 20% of his life left. Thus, E and Green Baby rose to level 20, which was an incredible result. A shocked Dolores couldn't believe her eyes, as a level 12 newbie had managed to defeat the boss at stage 100. This message was also displayed to the other players, who were also terrified of Night Xiao. Naturally, most of them were absolutely sure that the guy had simply hacked the game. Because it was impossible to find another explanation, everyone actively discussed it. Moreover, as a player at level 12, defeating the stage 100 boss was unrealistic. Meanwhile, the cave began to collapse as the dragon went berserk after the death of the brute. Dolores urged the boy to leave the dungeon immediately, but he stated that he had not taken all the trophies. However, survival was of course his first priority, and so he hurried to Tao's teleport. Thanking Rez, she opened the magical gates just in time, and they managed to escape. But as it later turned out, this was only a small part of their journey through the labyrinth. Because the fire dragon appeared on the horizon once again, they were terrified. A frightened Dolores said that she hadn't signed up for this and that she should run away. At the same time, she urged the young man not to forget to pay her money and send her the location of the sacred spring. After which they finally escaped from such a furious dragon, straight to Fenye City, where the teenager unexpectedly met Queen Sophia and handed her the necessary document. Cheryl was extremely grateful to him and began to thank him for the task he had completed. The young man was also worried about how to unlock the secret class now, but the princess said that this was not the scroll, because from Stir's words he can unlock the potential and awaken a unique class. Soon she called the teenager to follow her to a secret room in the castle, where the guy had never been. Even in his past life, he didn't know about this room. The royal monster tamer Stir was also there, and Xiao greeted him kindly. Without thinking twice, he asked the master to help him unlock his secret class. After reading the scroll, the old man asked if the teenager was really ready to unlock his potential. Naturally, E responded positively, saying that he could not wait for this moment any longer, because the main character was eager to become the strongest hunter. Xiao wanted to quickly complete the much-needed procedure so he could enjoy his new strength. Meanwhile, Stir continued to carefully read the instructions. The young master began to mentally rush him. Suddenly, the king's henchman urged him not to resist. Ye replied that he had not even thought about it. A couple of minutes later, 5 crystal balls surrounded the young beast tamer. Stir was shocked by such an unexpected turn of events. He did not expect that all 5 balls would activate, which spoke of the superiority of the secret upper class, which is what Cheryl asked him about. After all, even the old man himself was only able to use 3 balls during the transition. Therefore, Stir did not understand how the teenager was able to do this with his inner strength. Sophia suddenly said that apparently Night Xiao was more than an ordinary person. Soon, E came to his senses and the system reported the transition to a new class. From now on, he bore the title of Beast Master. Also, all of his characteristics increased significantly. The guy felt an incredible surge of strength. Stair noted that now for each new level, the young man will receive 40 attribute points. In doing so, Xiao was honored to receive a new list of materials for crafting epic armor. The old man called the boy incredible and said that his potential was limitless and that he had entered the divine realm. He began to understand that in this life, he simply had to become much stronger. After a certain amount of time, more newcomers decided to undergo the test of the abyss. The guard noted that they looked prepared enough, and then asked at what level the warriors wished to take the test. The released tiger said that he would like to undergo the test of the abyss stage alone, adding that even if he fails to pass it, he will leave this world with honor. His young assistants sincerely believed in the success of their commander and began to support him. The extremely self-confident warrior declared that he would return with the spoils very soon. But just a couple of minutes later, the frightened and wounded liberated tiger returned. Having stated that at a certain point the monsters mutated, the servants immediately gave him the necessary potion. At this time, Xiao went to the Great Rift, which was also located far away in the mountains. Realizing that he had become unattainable for the other players, Yi decided not to attract unnecessary attention to himself. Although it was extremely difficult to do, he concentrated on self-improvement. In connection with this, the Green Kid once again began to destroy the monsters. In the end, the dragon defeated the stone golem and gained a lot of experience. The teenager also received several legendary items in the form of a hammer and a sword. Xiao began to examine his trophies, and at that moment another big guy approached him. Judging by the description of the enemy's characteristic system, Yi realized that he was facing a boss. The only thing that was known was that its level was rather low, which contained a certain catch. So they began to fight the stone giant, who was extremely slow. Meanwhile, the liberated tiger died from his injuries in the abyssal dungeon. His assistants couldn't believe it because they were following in Night Xiao's footsteps. At this point, the system notified the players that Yi had passed another test and was the first to do so. In doing so, he received the Stone of Valor, and the guy himself noted that it was as easy as pie. However, he was surprised by the fact that there were no trophies from the stone boss. The players began to say that the young master had clearly taken advantage of some loophole that they were unaware of, because they had no other explanation, and besides, he was the only one who got that far. The protagonist in turn tried to understand why, besides the main reward, he was given nothing else for killing the boss. But the young monster tamer still received a fragment of the abyss, which was already a good result. At the same time, Xiao could not understand what they were used for and why they were needed. Having come to the conclusion that it was better to deal with this later, Yi headed back. But as soon as the teenager used the teleport, he was met by unknown knights. They congratulated him on passing another test and hastened to present him with an award. Opening the chest, Xiao saw a Valor Stone that enhanced the Valor Mark, which was a real gift of fate, and he began to test this effect. Thus, Yi was able to strengthen his sign with the crystal and thereby increase his characteristics. The joyful young man said that with it he would become an invincible warrior in a level 30 location. Suddenly, the system informed players that they would soon have the opportunity to exit the game. Naturally, most of the newcomers were delighted with this news, while others were indifferent. After a couple of minutes, a huge number of people rushed back to the real world. Soon Xiao also returned home to rest a bit. All the news was about this video game and Qing Feng. He was a professional player, who together with his team, was able to pass most of the deadly tests. But Ye himself did not know him. Zhu, in turn, gave some advice to the newcomers and encouraged them to go into the dungeon with the team. He also mentioned that if people fall asleep, they will automatically return to the apocalypse. Qing Feng suddenly mentioned Knight Xiao, saying that even if the best players united, they would not be able to defeat him. This news was being watched by a certain influential person who wanted to have such a teammate. In connection with this, he ordered his subordinate Fu Bo to immediately find this Ye. The guy began to understand that the invasion of the apocalypse into the real world was happening somewhat slower than in his past life. But Xiao decided not to worry about it and focus on reaching level 30. After all, it is only then that he will be able to take another pet, which is quite important for completing the game. A few hours later, he found himself back in the virtual world with the goal of continuing to destroy monsters. As always, he was helped in this by the Green Kid, who easily dealt with the demons. With each battle, the dragon grew stronger and gained invaluable experience, which played a key role. His flame attacks also increased in power, which was what his master wanted. Soon he scattered the stone golems to the sides, and a joyful E praised his pet. After a certain amount of time, they were able to reach level 24. The stunned players could only watch the teenager's success and envy him. Extremely surprised, Jifeng believed that at higher levels progress would be somewhat slower. However, Xiao, as always, surprised everyone, while Ju was absolutely happy with his second place in the ranking. At this time, the powerful dragons were discussing the appearance of such a powerful man. After all, never before had they encountered such a strong opponent. The fire monster stated that he must be stopped before it was too late. The azure dragon insisted that he was simply lucky, because a boy could not possess such power. Suddenly the fiery demon said that they would have to entrust the future of their people to this guy. Naturally, the azure dragon categorically disagreed with him, but there was no more time left. At the same time, the fire monster stated that the aura of this young master was truly unique. The azure demon said again that the young beast tamer was just a pathetic human. Besides, their fate could not be entrusted to some mortal, and this was where their opinions differed. After all, the fiery dragon still considered the main character to be his last hope. He also set about convincing the azure monster to believe in humans, but his colleague was extremely skeptical about this idea, and told him about it. Meanwhile, Qingfeng and his team reached the central city of Windcliff. Of course, they understood that Xiao was the first to be here, but the main thing is that they managed to survive and follow in his footsteps. At that moment, huge dragons flew over them, one of them holding Yi, who called for help, believing that the monster would simply kill him, but they only looked at them. Ju's henchman stated that it was Night Xiao and that he needed help, but Qingfeng said that this was impossible, because the demon would deal with them in the blink of an eye. Rumors of the boy's kidnapping spread throughout the city, but some believed that the dragons were helping him level up. Since they did not know how to explain his high stage, Yi was brought to a certain altar at that time. Where did the frightened teenager recognize them? Because he stole that very egg from one of them. Then the young man realized that he couldn't get out of here and would have to accept this outcome. Suddenly the azure dragon asked him if the mortal was not afraid of them. Another added that they wouldn't actually kill him, then reminded him of the egg. Xiao pointed out that he had nicknamed the boy Green Kid, but the azure monster was indignant, saying that such a name was shameful for a dragon to bear. Then they started talking about something among themselves and announced that it was time for them to get started. Taking off into the sky, the demons shouted their spell. Yi was terribly frightened. Having begun to beg them not to kill him and promising to do everything they asked, Abisu declared that he had nothing to do with the guy. Suddenly their magical energy was directed towards a huge dragon statue. The stone beast's eyes sparkled in an instant, and Xiao began to await his end. Suddenly, the statue emitted a magical beam at him, and the dragons began to speak of the blessing of their clan. Urging the teenager to embrace the power of their brethren, Ye couldn't understand what was happening to him. After 3 days, the players began to wonder what happened to Xiao, because the guy did not appear in the city. One of them stated that he had in fact been given incredible power, and now it was time for retribution. Yi, in turn, came to his senses in the middle of the wasteland with a terrible headache. The system reported that he had become stronger. Having started to look around, the young man realized that he was on the territory of the 40th level. He also looked through all his characteristics and didn't find anything special. But suddenly Xiao discovered a new skill that could transform coins into a shield. When the magical barrier was activated, only 1% of his total money was spent. Yi soon discovered that he had no limit on how many beasts he could tame, which was simply unbelievable. After all, even a royal trapper could have about 3 pets. Su noted that he was lucky, as always. The delighted teenager instantly fell to his knees and spoke words of gratitude to the dragon race. After which, he finally went to the testing hall of the 30th level. To his surprise, the guard recognized him and asked if the boy really intended to take the test at the level of the abyss. Yi answered positively, and within a couple of seconds a portal opened in front of him. The protagonist was in anticipation of his new dragon abilities. So of course he was eager to go into the abyss to test his strength. The knight wished the young master good luck, and Night Xiao moved towards the teleport. A moment later, he found himself in the snowy mountains where there was a strong wind. The young animal tamer noted that if he had known about such a wild cold, he would have dressed warmer. Suddenly, a huge snowball appeared behind Yi and was heading towards him. The guy managed to dodge with great difficulty, realizing what a dangerous location he found himself in. Ebisu urged him not to jump on the snowdrifts, but to simply turn on his magical barrier. At this moment, a huge ice giant suddenly headed towards them. Xiao did not expect such a turn of events. In connection with this, he immediately ordered the Green Kid to go into combat readiness. The dragon immediately began to release its furious flames at him, and just a couple of minutes later, the mutated snow yeti collapsed to the ground unconscious. A stunned Yi noticed that his pet had indeed become much stronger. After looking at its characteristics, the teenager was extremely surprised, as the dragon had significantly increased the power of its skills. but monsters rushed towards them again. Xiao called on Green Baby to prepare for battle. Having ordered the destruction of all demons, he could only watch what was happening. As his pet burns a crowd of monsters to the ground, they simply couldn't do anything against him. Soon they defeated all the monsters, and along with them their leader, who turned out to be not so strong. Having taken another essence from him, the young man said that it was too easy. The system also notified all players that Night Xiao had passed the Abyss trial. Most people admired the guy's work, but there were also those who were irritated by it. One of the influential players wanted to meet Yi personally and win him over to his side. The teenager, in turn, tried to understand how many fragments he would have to collect from the monsters and what they were needed for. He was also lucky enough to obtain a stone that improved his sign of valor, after which he finally decided to go to the city to visit the blacksmith. After some time, Xiao arrived in Fengye City and was surprised by the number of players. There were many more of them, and the young man hid under a cloak so as not to be recognized. However, at the entrance to the forge, the guy saw a huge line of people wanting to improve their weapons. He silently walked past them and approached the master, asking him to evaluate the equipment. The old man initially chased him away, but when he turned around and saw Night Xiao in front of him, he was dumbfounded. The blacksmith immediately jumped up from his seat and very kindly asked him to enter the room. Everyone was perplexed, not understanding who this man was, since only first-class citizens were allowed to enter shops without waiting in line. Meanwhile, Ye asked the quirky old man to improve his badge of valor. The blacksmith knew perfectly well that he had to be careful not to break it, since the sign was worth a lot of money. After which he began to temper it in order to increase the performance of this item, and soon he succeeded in doing this, and those around him were shocked by such an incredible thing. Suddenly people began to realize that it was indeed that Night Xiao in front of them. As a result, the players literally burst into the forge trying to befriend the guy. While the old man was dispersing the crowd, Yi laid out all the weapons and armor he had. Having also asked him to evaluate them, the blacksmith naturally hastened to satisfy the young man. One of the people suddenly took a photo of the main character and sent it to the others. At the same time, he indicated the exact coordinates of the forge where the young master was located. Naturally, everyone went to see him, because they literally dreamed of meeting him. Having finally escaped the feral crowd of players, the young monster tamer hid around the corner of the building, where he was unexpectedly discovered by one of the extremely influential people in the video game. The guy said that he would like to offer him a deal on favorable terms. He added that he had never offered anything like this to anyone, so Xiao would be satisfied. Then he offered to buy dark gold equipment from him for several tens of billions. But the young man noted that these were trifles. He could not remember this person because he did not exist in his past life. However, he recognized another killer who was standing behind him, which seemed strange to him. Since he had not previously joined any factions, the stranger in turn continued to praise the teenager, claiming that he himself does not know what benefit he can bring in reality, where he will have everything he only dreamed of. At the same time, the unknown warrior tried in every possible way to lure Xiao to his side. He replied that he was pleased because he came to him with a request, which meant he respected him. However, he did not like the pompous way he spoke to him, exalting himself to the level of a god. So the guy decided to moderate his ardor. The stunned stranger said that he would not dare to do this. But a moment later, Xiao fired a fireball at him and instantly sent him to the respawn point, urging others to no longer associate with this extremely suspicious person. Also, after the death of the unknown warrior, in his place lay trophies, which Yi asked them to take as compensation. But as soon as he tried to leave, they were surrounded by city guards led by the captain, who in turn demanded an explanation from the players, because murder is prohibited in Fengye. The bully called for a confession as to who exactly dared to harm another and why. Sai stated without hesitation that he had done it, and the shocked guard noted that he had no shortage of impudence. The captain understood that he was dealing with a first-class citizen and asked why he had done this. The young man said that an unknown person began to threaten him, and he decided to teach him a lesson. The guard asked not to take the law into his own hands in the future, and to call them for help so that they could deal with the scoundrel personally. The surrounding players were simply shocked by what was happening, not understanding why he was not arrested. The captain, in turn, ordered his subordinates to continue patrolling. But one of them asked why they left this guy behind, since he killed a player in the city. Then she told them that the queen had been waiting for Night Xiao for a long time, and that if they reported his location to her, they would receive money. The princess, as always, was restless in the residence, trying to figure out where Yi had disappeared to. The girl was really worried about him, and besides, the latest news was not comforting. After all, everyone was talking about how the huge dragons took him away with them. A couple of minutes later, her assistant Eliza ran in and told her that Xiao had been found. Sharel's expression instantly changed and she jumped up from her chair, asking where he was. At this time, the arrogant player's minions found him at the respawn point, saying that they could not protect their master since murder was forbidden in the city. Besides, he was level 30, so the leader ordered the killer to use his stealth to return and pick up his things. But Xiao suddenly appeared on the roof of the building and said that he would no longer need them. Boar urged the protagonist not to be stupid because if he starts acting up again, he won't be able to leave here. After all, the respawn point is guarded much better than the central city of Fengye. However, the young master still fired another fireball at him, and everyone was shocked. Naturally, Boar's servants wanted to take revenge on the young beast tamer, but Xiao declared that if they took even one step, they would follow their boss. Meanwhile, their leader revived again and began to claim that he would not get away with it so easily, adding that if he didn't stop, all his friends and family would soon die. Naturally, Ye didn't listen to him and struck him down again with a flame sphere, which Boar didn't expect at all. Players began to converge on the respawn point, watching what was happening. But the extremely arrogant stranger could no longer be reborn, and everyone began to wonder what had happened to him. At that moment, Black Inquisitors approached Xiao and asked who dared to kill people. Boar's henchmen noted that now the boy was definitely finished, since there was no escaping this organization. In fact, Yi himself understood perfectly well that he could not cope with such strong opponents. As a result, he surrendered and agreed to be punished for his actions. The leader of the Inquisitors ordered his guards to take the boy away immediately. Meanwhile, Boer could not wake up in his estate, and Fubo became nervous. But the young gentleman never came to his senses. The old man was simply horrified by what was happening. At that moment, his worried father appeared and asked the butler what had happened. The servant sadly said that Boer was dead, and the shocked old man asked who did it. Xiao, in turn, was in the Longhuang Empire's courtroom, where he was asked why he killed a man. He replied that he had repeatedly threatened him with his players, and he had to defend his honor as a first-class citizen. Naturally, most were not on the teenager's side and said that he had acted disgustingly. Thus, he was permanently banned from visiting the eastern part of the city. But Sophia suddenly appeared and declared that, from a logical point of view, Xiao had acted correctly, since there was no place for provocateurs in the city. At the same time, the Duchess insisted that Xiao's punishment was extremely unfair. The stunned Chief Inquisitor Aitor immediately greeted the Queen, who stated that in fact Knight Xiao was her close friend, and she did not want to cause him any trouble. And since a commoner insulted a first-class citizen, it was Boer who must suffer the punishment of death. Sharel also ordered that Yi's shackles be immediately removed and released in the courtroom, which was soon done. As soon as they left the Longhuang Hall, Xiao thanked his savior. Ebisu, in turn, noted that he was, as always, lucky that Sophia stood up for him. The girl said that as soon as she heard about the dragon's abduction, she immediately began looking for him. Xiao suddenly said that this kidnapping turned out to be a real blessing for him, and he became stronger. Then Sophia urged the young man to immediately go with her to the estate to tell her in detail about his journey. Of course, Yi agreed. But first he wanted to see Old Man Steram to talk about the assignment for the second promotion. Soon they went to the royal trapper, who was sincerely happy with the boy's success. The protagonist noted that nothing would have worked without him, after which he asked for help with the mission for promotion. Stur said that no one could give him a clear answer regarding the second promotion, because the realm of the gods is extremely mysterious, and for this it is necessary to obtain the approval of the deity. Xiao asked if he was really talking about the lost temple. He added that he had heard about it once, but did not know where such a sacred place was located. The old man stated that, according to rumors, the temple suddenly appears and then disappears without a trace, like a mirage. Ebisu said sadly that it seemed his second promotion would be quite difficult. Soon the guy set off on his journey. Sophia walked him to the gate, urging him to definitely visit her. The young monster tamer told Su that they would have to postpone their trip to the lost temple because there was another important matter. Moreover, in just a few hours a portal to another dimension will open, from where demons will emerge. And when this happens, all living things and houses in Fengye City will be destroyed. Therefore, they need to be well prepared to meet the monsters. In connection with this, the young master hastened to summon Dolores, but she never appeared. Then Xiao stuck his head into the teleport and saw the girl. She was clearly unhappy with his appearance. They said he was nothing but trouble, but Ye assured them there wouldn't be any dragons this time. Since everything would happen within the city, a puzzled Tao asked what could be wrong with Fengye, after which he asked her to simply look after his house in the western part of the city. But Rez sensed a catch. The teenager immediately began to convince her otherwise, and ultimately she agreed. Xiao then decided to head to the battlefield to level up and thus prepare for the invasion. Having dealt with the next monsters, the young man finally headed home and exited the game. As night fell, the boy was already asleep when everything gradually began to change. Soon all players were reconnected to the video game without their knowledge and without the ability to exit. Xiao was also already in the game and waited for Dolores to arrive, who fulfilled her promise. The young man noted that all his stores were under her control. Tao replied that everything would be fine with them. At that moment, thunder struck, but not the usual kind. Pink lightning flashed across the sky. A stunned Rez asked what it was. Yi stated that their world had been invaded by abyssal monsters. Those heading straight to the city, the guards immediately sounded the first level alarm, ordering everyone not to leave the boundaries of Fengye and to prepare for the invasion of demons. A moment later, the monsters began to smash buildings to pieces, and people ran in panic in different directions. Brave Tao immediately rushed to attack, asking Xiao how he could predict the monster invasion. Having finally defeated most of the mutants, a huge level 100 lord moved towards them. A shocked Dolores noted that whenever he called her for help, the same thing always happened. After which, the divine stage sorceress tried to strike the brute with her lightning, which brought immediate results, and the lord collapsed with a roar into the square. But this was only the beginning, because soon more monsters rushed towards them. The enraged witch called on Knight Xiao to help her immediately, and not stand there like a pillar. Of course he agreed, and instantly released the enraged green kid. Meanwhile, the demons continued to attack the city, and the guards struggled to hold back their onslaught. However, this was quite difficult to do, since they were superior in strength to humans. The huge monster, in turn, did not stop destroying the houses around it, but in the end, Ye and Tao defeated it. Naturally, not without the help of a dragon, who accidentally caught a neighboring store with his fire. The protagonist urged him to be more careful and directed him to another crowd of mutants. Green Baby dealt with most of the ordinary monsters without any difficulty. The dragon also burned their leaders with its furious flames, from which Xiao gained a lot of experience. At the same time, the young animal tamer asked Tao to help his pet. In response, she stated that it would cost more. The young master agreed to pay her and went to collect trophies from the defeated monsters. Thus, among other junk, he suddenly found an epic ring. At this time, something terrible was happening in the outskirts of the city, where demons were running amok. The players tried their best to fight them off, but it was quite difficult to do so. Qingfeng, in turn, urged his wards to retreat, since the monsters were too strong. But Quanfeng didn't have time to return and began to distract one of the monsters, calling on Zhu and the others to run away. A stunned Feng declared that he would not go anywhere without him, but at that moment the demon knocked the shield out of his hands. Quan instantly lost consciousness because the blow was too strong. A huge reptile was approaching them. It seemed like these were the last seconds of their lives. But at the last minute, the green kid came to their aid and defeated the boss, who, having received such devastating damage from fire, simply fell to the ground. Qingfeng immediately saw a dragon in the sky. He was perplexed because the monster helped them, after which he once again rushed towards the mutants and began to throw them aside, with the help of such a fierce flame, burning absolutely everything in its path. By then, Quanfeng had come to his senses and seen the scene, declaring that God had heard his prayers. Suddenly, Green Baby was called out by Yi and urged to hurry, as there were still several bosses ahead. Naturally, Feng's team was surprised to recognize the teenager as the same Knight Xiao. Zhu immediately ran up to him and asked him to wait a bit. The young man turned around, after which he began to listen to words of gratitude addressed to him for their salvation. The self-confident Yi noted that he was just passing by, and if they had nowhere to hide, they could do so in the western part of the city. Qing, in turn, urged his teammates to hide in the western region. After a certain amount of time had passed, Xiao realized that killing ordinary demons was too expensive. Therefore, they need to get closer to the main gate to eliminate the bosses, where the central part of Fengye was on fire, and most of the buildings were simply destroyed. The others guessed that the guy had actually gone to level up by killing various bosses. And after a couple of minutes, they saw how the teenager moved to a new stage of development. Thus, Knight Xiao was at level 35, which shocked everyone. At this moment, a fire meteorite suddenly landed in Fengye City, which destroyed many buildings in the central square. No one could understand what it was. The protagonist looked into the distance, where nothing remained of the gate and the part of the city adjacent to it. The picture was truly terrifying. At that moment, the Skeleton King rushed towards the young master. Meanwhile, Ator was informed that the shield wall had been destroyed, and most of the guards were dead. The Inquisitor in turn sadly called for everyone to retreat immediately. Suddenly lightning struck right next to them. No one could understand what was happening, assuming that in fact it was divine help that came to them. Dolores noticed that the young beast tamer was indeed cunning, since he called her to kill another boss. At the same time, he himself, as always, remained on the sidelines and only directed his pets. Tao said that it was a level 100 abnormal lord, and they couldn't defeat it. But Xiao had a different opinion. The only thing she agreed to was to impose several positive effects on the guy. Yi also asked her to clear the way for him straight to the boss to fight him. Of course, she decided to help her brother in arms and began to destroy small mutants, of which there turned out to be quite a few, so the sorceress had a hard time. And after waiting for the right moment, Xiao rushed towards the Skeleton King. Tao, in turn, ordered Aitor to take the people to the northern part of the city, while they cleared the area here. However, the Inquisitor's assistant noticed that the demon tamer was about to attack the Lord. Aitor said that it was not their concern, and that they needed to hurry to the northern region. Ebisu started to panic, saying that this was a bad idea, but Yi was as confident as ever. Meanwhile, the huge skeleton hastened to attack the witch Dolores. The girl instantly generated a magical barrier that began to absorb all damage. At the same time, the embittered Tao called on Xiao to help her. The guy stated that the main thing in this matter is not to rush. Then he pointed his improved sign of valor towards the level 100 lord. As a result, a fiery beam pierced the body of the boss, who suddenly froze in place. And after a couple of seconds, he suffered instant death, which is exactly what the teenager wanted. Soon the skeleton gradually began to fall apart. Everyone was amazed by the strength of the young man. Few could believe that the kid actually dealt with such a powerful boss on his own. The players immediately rejoiced, once again convinced of the power of the incredible Knight Xiao. With a queue already forming to become his disciple, Qing Feng was also amazed by his abilities. Thus, the teenager acquired more epic rank trophies. Naturally, Yi was immensely happy about this, and the objects were clearly different from ordinary monsters. The young man was about to leave, but suddenly Ebisu found a divine artifact. Xiao in turn thanked the mentor and remarked that this was indeed a good thing. The monsters suddenly rushed back into the rift, which of course made everyone happy. Thus, the invasion of anomalous creatures came to an end, and the players' rejoicing knew no bounds. Of course, the guards decided to inform their mayor about the victory over the demons. They also informed the old man that this was all thanks to Knight Xiao and Dolores. In connection with this, the mayor expressed a desire to personally meet Feng Ye's saviors. The next day, the protagonist and Tao were invited to visit the elder with Sophia. The ruler began to express gratitude to the young master and his assistant. The system instantly informed the young beast tamer that he had received 20 points of favor from Yalun. Suddenly, Dolores announced that she needed to return to the temple to solve some problems. The old man asked Cheryl to provide his possessions in the western part of Feng Ye, since the eastern region was completely destroyed. However, the queen refused him, since most of the quarter belonged to Yi. Then Yalun approached the guy with this request, and naturally he agreed to provide housing for a separate fee. The mayor replied that he would immediately order the bank to give him several thousand gold coins. Xiao, in turn, kept only a couple of stores for himself, and handed the rest over to the elder. Sophia suddenly interrupted them and announced that she had submitted a petition to the imperial court for Yi to be granted the title of nobleman. Even the teenager himself did not expect such a turn of events and thanked the princess. Naturally, the mayor supported her initiative, and suddenly Cheryl asked if he liked the idea. The young man thanked her once again, and Sophia noted that he had saved the city and deserved it. Meanwhile, Yeren couldn't get through to her beloved Han until the night. Suddenly she saw a photograph of Zhou lying bloodied on the ground. A shocked Qin realized that he was dead, which made her even more angry, because she spent all the money on him, and Hong was unable to kill the monster. Then she came up with a plan to return to Xiao, and it suddenly dawned on her that he was the best man in her life. After all, he loved her so much, and she dared to reject him, and now she needs to ask him for forgiveness. Once outside, the girl hurried to Yi's house to quickly establish a relationship with him. At this time, some players acquired a teleport scroll to the central city of Fengye, where in the western part, there was a crowd of people who intended to buy housing. Xiao headed to the blacksmith to identify the next magical items. However, the old man's shop was destroyed and he was unable to help the teenager. Suddenly, Ye called him to follow him so that he could provide him with a new forge. Soon they came to a luxurious, top-tier forge in the western district. The stunned old man remarked that this was simply an incredible place and asked who owned this shop. The guy said that it was his building, but the blacksmith could take it over and share the profits with him. After which he began to thank the young man, and Xiao showed him the divine artifact, stating that it needed to be identified. The old man sighed heavily and said that he would try, but was not sure of success. However, the teenager encouraged him to get down to business without fear, so that he could finally discover the value of the item. After a certain amount of time, the blacksmith sadly said that he had not succeeded. Then he asked him to do 3 epic things which he had no problem with. Then Xiao went to the mayor, but the guards did not let anyone see him. But when the boy approached them, they kindly let him pass, saying that the elder would receive him. Arriving at Yalun, the protagonist began to talk about the lost race that he wanted to find. The old man was amazed and asked the young master how he could help him. He asked him to announce a reward for any information about the race, in the amount of 5,000,003 items of dark gold. The ruler kindly agreed to help the young beast tamer in this difficult task. After a certain amount of time, the system notified the players about Xiao's next level increase. This time, the teenager passed the Abyss test at level 40, and no one was surprised by his success. The young man continued to defeat his enemies with his magical abilities. Suddenly, the monster attacked him, but Yi managed to generate a protective barrier, which began to absorb all the damage, thereby preventing anyone from getting close to the guy. Green Kid, in turn, hastened to attack the monster and doused it with a fiery beam. Thus, the demon fell dead to the ground. Ebisu noted that if it weren't for his shield, Xiao would already be dead. But he also stated that all the main work is done by the dragon, which grows by the hour, after which he went to collect trophies from the monster and received another shard. At this moment, the system informed Ye that Yalong had obtained the necessary information about the missing race. The players, in turn, found people who were extremely similar to the extinct race, with characteristic features. While Xiao arrived at the mayor's office to find out what he had managed to find out about them, the old man then ordered his protege to tell him how he had met the short people in the forest, right outside the city of Fengye. He added that during the monster invasion he took refuge in a dense forest, where he discovered the gnomes. Xiao immediately called on him to take him to that area, and the knight asked if he needed a detachment of guards. The guy refused and hurried into the depths of the forest where the missing race was located. Players were already watching them, trying to catch at least one to receive a cash reward. But suddenly the dwarves noticed them and immediately began to attack, throwing a hammer at them, but it only took away 80 units of life. But a moment later, the hammer suddenly burst into flames, and the damage reached several thousand. The rest watched from the sidelines and understood that it was really better not to mess around with these gnomes. Durin began to say that it would be better if they did not go through human lands, but Thor assured them that everything would be fine. In connection with this, they decided to leave here as soon as possible, but some wanted to defeat the persistent people. The knight at this time continued to lead Xiao deeper into the forest, showing him the places where he had seen the dwarves. The player saw Yi at that moment and thought that he would now defeat these short people. In fact, he was eager to find out what the ancient race was capable of. The ruler's servant urged Xiao to be extremely careful with the dwarves, as they were quite dangerous. Then the teenager asked him to go back, saying that he would deal with them himself from now on. A terrified Ebisu declared that this was a very bad idea, but Yi still rushed towards them. Durin immediately threatened him with violence, but Thor ordered him not to touch the man, adding that he doesn't seem hostile and that they can always talk. Suddenly they felt that he had more than one divine artifact. They also felt the presence of other magical objects, but that was not the most important thing. At a certain point, Thor stated that the young man exuded the aura of a true god. At the same time, the gnomes were able to determine the exact level of the main character and his characteristics. But they were more worried about the incredible energy of the young animal tamer. The players were puzzled as to why the young master did not engage in battle with the shorties. After all, they expected that Night Xiao would deal with the crowd of dwarves in seconds. Yi, in turn, stated that he needed the help of their clan. Durin asked if he really needed to forge a divine artifact. The teenager replied that he needed to find a lost temple, and that was why he contacted them, adding that it was necessary to complete the job change quest, but they could not reveal the location of the temple. Having stated that he needed to earn their trust, the guy understood that this would be difficult. Then he asked to identify the artifact. The young man immediately showed them the divine object and asked if they could handle the job. Naturally, Thor said that they were the best blacksmiths and could easily identify this thing. Looking at the artifact, Durin noticed that it was not forged. Xiao was surprised. The dwarf also stated that this item was not originally an artifact, and was transformed into one only when interacting with a certain element. Suddenly they asked how he got it. Ye replied that he had recently killed an anomalous boss. The stunned gnomes could not believe that the boy was able to defeat such a powerful monster. At the same time, they said that identifying this artifact would be very expensive, but the teenager was willing to pay almost any amount of money and challenged them to name a price. Thor immediately showed his 5 fingers, and the puzzled guy asked if there were really only 5 coins. The old man stated that he meant 500 gold coins, and the young man smiled. After which he asked why exactly 500 coins. The dwarves looked at each other and reset the price to 300 units of gold. However, Shay said that if they really identified the item, he would pay them both $1 million. The shocked people from the short race froze in place, realizing that this money could buy tons of rice. Then, E threw them a bag with 1,000 coins and said that this was an advance payment and that he would also provide them with food. Naturally, the excited gnomes said that they would do everything in the best possible way. And literally a few minutes later, Thor successfully completed the identification of the divine artifact. The boy soon learned of the incredible properties of this item and praised the gnomes. Xiao then called on them to gather and go with him to the central city of Fengye, where he would arrange a feast for them and feed them. The stunned gnomes asked if he was really inviting them to the human city. Of course, E answered positively. Then the enthusiastic people hurried to collect their things. And just a few minutes later, they walked into the city, where everyone turned their attention to them. The players began to wonder why Xiao had decided to befriend the dwarves, assuming that the short ones would soon gift them with new weapons. A couple of hours later, the short people had lunch, declaring that they had never eaten anything more delicious. The knight reminded them that everything was paid for by Mr. Ye and they could feel free to do so. Having waited for the right moment, the young man once again approached Thor and asked him to tell him about the lost temple. Having shown a certain detector with which it could be found, the dwarf declared that it would be better for him not to do this, because an incredibly terrible creature lives there, and it is better not to mess with it. The main character asked what kind of demon it was. Thor replied that their ancestors told them about it, but they themselves never met him, since the god of fire imprisoned this creature in a fiery wasteland. However, the young master was not afraid of the monster, and said that he needed to get there in order to change his profession. Thus, Thor gave him the temple's location detector and the royal crystal. The young beast tamer was more than pleased with the gifts and thanked the gnomes for their help. He stated that if there were such things about them, he was ready to pay handsomely for them, but Thor said he only had one crystal, and all he had left were fragments of the fire spirit, and their effect was somewhat weaker than that of a full-fledged stone. He also handed a few pieces to the guy. He sighed sadly, noting that this was not enough. After which, Xiao set out on his journey and urged the dwarves to make themselves at home. Ebisu asked if he was really going to take such a risk, and the teenager replied that this matter would require one person. Meanwhile, Dolores changed her clothes and showed off in front of the mirror. She believed that it was high time she changed her costume, especially since it suited her better. Suddenly, a guard ran up to her and said that a very important visitor had come to see her. Seeing Xiao at the door, Tao realized that she would have to go to hell again. In this regard, she asked who needed to be eliminated this time. The guy smiled and said that they just needed to take a walk to the lost temple. A stunned Dolores declared that she would go there because it was certain death. Besides, finding a fire shrine isn't that easy, and Xiao tried to interest her with payment, adding that he also received a compass from the dwarves that would lead them to the lost temple. The girl picked up the detector and asked why he decided to go there. He replied that he needed to change his profession. Then Dolores asked him for a week to prepare, but the teenager said that they didn't have that much time. But Tao continued to ask him about the reward. The young man stated that the temple was full of treasures. Ultimately, she agreed to go with him on such a long and extremely dangerous journey. A couple of days later, they found themselves in a fiery wasteland, where everything was consumed by magma. Dolores asked Knight Xiao if he knew exactly where to go, since they had already walked several dozen kilometers. He noticed that the compass response had increased significantly, so it wouldn't be long. At that moment, a fire shark suddenly jumped out of the boiling lava at them. The teenager called on Tao to deal with her, so that he could continue his journey to the temple in peace. A moment later, Rez used her powers to turn her into a block of ice. However, the monster instantly melted the ice and thus came to the surface. A few seconds later, they were attacked by several dozen more fiery monsters. Dolores, stunned, could not understand where they had come from in such numbers. The young man said that the compass was literally going crazy. He did not understand what this was connected with. Suddenly, a magical teleport appeared right in front of them. E and Rez stepped back, realizing that before them was the entrance to the lost temple and they had finally found it. The protagonist noted that this was the gate of the sanctuary, which he saw for the first time, just like Tao. Meanwhile, the enraged sharks again rushed towards the young master. Dolores, in turn, continued to exterminate such persistent fire monsters. The young beast tamer immediately used a barrier to prevent the demons from harming him, after which E asked Rez to put positive effects on him so that he could break through. Thus, Xiao was able to ignore absolutely all the shark attacks and rush towards the gate. At the same time, his magical shield was cracking at the seams, and it seemed that it would not last long. However, the extremely self-confident teenager continued to run towards the entrance to the lost temple. He declared that even the gods were powerless to stop him, and that he would still achieve his goal. After which the guy still broke through the portal and found himself on the other side of the sanctuary. Having started to look around, the young man came to the conclusion that this was indeed an ancient place. At that moment, a huge mutated guard appeared in front of him and asked why the man had come. Without thinking twice, Xiao replied that he simply wanted to explore such a famous temple. Then the skeleton called him to kneel before him to receive his blessing, adding that if the boy gives him the most sincere praises and wishes, then he will receive his protection. However, Ye was in no hurry to do this, and stated that he would not fall on his knees in front of some statue. The unknown monster unexpectedly called himself Hephaestus, the god of fire and blacksmithing, after which he directed fiery attacks towards Knight Xiao, who immediately retreated back. Then the demon once again ordered him to kneel and submit to his will, but the young man showed him the divine artifact and said that he would never do that. At that moment, the green kid appeared on his own and rushed at the flame god. The dragon immediately began to deliver his crushing blows. Then he completely incinerated the statue with his furious fire. Xiao silently watched what was happening, assuming that dragons hate gods and this feeling is passed down through generations. Before his death, the guard said that now the man would not survive, since the monster had broken free. The system instantly informed Yi that he needed to leave the location, as he had incurred the god's wrath. A few seconds later, an earthquake began and everything also burst into flames. Xiao was terrified, believing that he had truly angered the god, and now he would not live, since it was simply impossible to defeat him. Suddenly, someone began to loudly curse Hephaestus. The guy still did not understand what was happening. At a certain moment, the ground disappeared from under his feet, and he fell into a fiery abyss. Shocked by this turn of events, the teenager did not know what to do or how to get out of the temple. Having activated the magical barrier, he continued to fly down into the unknown void. The end result was that Xiao landed on the ground in extreme pain, with fire blazing everywhere, in which he could make out the silhouette of an incomprehensible creature, and immediately stepped back. Soon, the divine phoenix in chains emerged from the flames. The system was unable to determine its level and various characteristics. Suddenly, the monster asked him if a man had really overcome the statue of Hephaestus. The guy answered positively, suggesting that there was clearly enmity between this demon and the god. Then the phoenix thanked him for his help and urged him to leave immediately, since the god could kill the boy. At the same time, the firebird declared that soon she would throw off her shackles and Hephaestus would definitely appear. The young master, in turn, asked how it happened that she ended up locked here. Phoenix reported that the vile god took advantage of his weakness at the moment of the offspring's birth and attacked him. The young monster tamer once again inquired about the whereabouts of his offspring, as he might be able to save them. But the demon replied that a man would never be able to tame a beast of such a level. Without thinking twice, Xiao summoned Green Baby to demonstrate his abilities. The stunned phoenix declared that this was impossible, because a man could not control a dragon. At this point, he finally realized that the teenager had been granted the blessing of the dragons. Suddenly, Yi interrupted the beast and once again called on it to tell where its offspring were. The monster tore off the feather and said that it would lead the youth to the lake of fire. Naturally, Xiao was happy with this turn of events, because he understood perfectly well that he would soon have another incredible pet. But Ebisu noted that he was too happy, because he would have to jump into magma. But this didn't frighten him at all, especially since with the gnome's gift it wasn't that difficult to do. After all, the fiery spirit crystal gave him 95% resistance to fire. Otherwise, he would have literally merged with the lava and would not have been able to escape from the temple. Thus, Sho rushed through the boiling magma after the phoenix feather, which led him deeper into the lake. After a certain time, it led him to a bowl with a fiery egg inside. The joyful young man looked at its fiery shell for a long time, realizing how lucky he was. After which, Ye hurried to get the huge phoenix egg, which turned out to be quite heavy. But as soon as he grabbed it, the temple shook again. An ominous voice asked, "Who dared to disturb the god?" Soon, the fiery beams again rushed towards Knight Xiao, and one of them still destroyed the guy's shield. A huge boiling hand immediately emerged from the magma. Ebisu urged the teenager to run away immediately. Forgetting the weight of the egg, Ye instantly grabbed it and hurried back to the phoenix, who in turn was simply shocked that an ordinary person could do this. In this regard, he asked him how the guy was able to overcome the boiling lava. Xiao smiled and said that this was not the first time he had stolen eggs in such a dangerous place. Meanwhile, an enraged Hephaestus shouted that the mortal must die, since he dared to destroy his statue and steal the egg. The phoenix immediately urged him to leave the lost temple before the god appeared, and he also asked him to raise a child who would definitely take revenge. But Yi, in turn, wondered if there was really no way to get him out of here. The monster was absolutely sure that the man was too weak to do this. But the guy decided to at least try, Then the demon pointed out 2 black seals to him. They had to be destroyed simultaneously, and only then would the phoenix become free. Night Xiao immediately showed him his divine artifact and asked if he could help with this matter. The stunned monster noted that this required 2 artifacts. Ye replied that he had a cooling crystal with which he could use the power of the god of destruction twice. Phoenix was perplexed that the man had such powerful items, but at that moment, the god of flame again declared that they would die. Then the teenager decided to take a risk in order to finally expel the divine entity from the temple, and thus free the demon who accidentally became a victim. The protagonist rushed to the seals and used the cooling crystal. As a result, the young master was still able to destroy the 2 divine seals. Phoenix, in turn, was shocked by such a brave young beast tamer. However, a moment later the god of fire Hephaestus appeared, and Xiao immediately backed away. The old man ordered him to immediately bow before him and give up his miserable life. Frightened, Yi began to understand that he couldn't stand up to such a big guy. The Lord of Flame once again called on the teenager to kneel and accept his fate. Meanwhile, the phoenix suddenly broke its shackles and broke free. He declared that Hephaestus had come to their aid at the right moment, and that inevitable revenge now awaited him. The stunned ruler could not understand how he had managed to break the chains. The enraged monster began to attack the fire god with its abilities. Having said that, only the dirty blood of Hephaestus could pay for his humiliation. Night Xiao watched the battle from the sidelines, realizing that it was better not to release the dragon. The ruler of the lost sanctuary immediately began to respond with hammer blows, which created fiery rays, but the phoenix managed to avoid its furious attacks. Continuing to insist that Hephaestus was obliged to pay with blood for his deeds, at that moment the old man struck the hammer again. The impact was so strong that the entire temple shook, and Ye was suddenly thrown into the air. The young man instantly activated a magical barrier to survive, which he managed to do with difficulty. After several minutes of fierce fighting, the ruler of flame suddenly broke his hammer. The demon took advantage of this and began to deal him a crushing series of blows. Hephaestus began to understand that he really could not defeat the phoenix. Moreover, he had lost his hammer, and after it his hand. The monster continued to attack the old man, saying that he had no right to be called a god. As a result, the Fire Lord collapsed to the ground. Xiao was horrified by what happened, realizing how powerful the phoenix is, a beast that doesn't even fear the gods. After which something strange happened. The bird began to bathe in Hephaestus's blood. Ebisu suddenly realized that she was regaining her strength. Yi, in turn, hurried to run away, but the phoenix noticed him and asked him to come to him. The frightened young man took the egg and said that he would gladly return it to him, and some misunderstanding occurred between them. But as it turned out later, the monster actually wanted to thank the guy for his help. In connection with this, he gave him 2 drops of the pseudo-god's blood, and naturally Xiao accepted this gift. But even the system could not determine the purpose of this essence of Hephaestus. Although this item was extremely precious, the phoenix unexpectedly told him about the use of blood, because it was with her that the young man could help his cub be born. However, in what way exactly, even the demon himself did not know, the teenager wondered. The fire demon also stated that Hephaestus's death would spread everywhere, and the temple would soon collapse. So he urged the protagonist to get out of here as quickly as possible, but Yi wanted to take the loot from the god's body. In connection with this, the young beast tamer headed towards the defeated ruler of flame. Subsequently, he acquired a broken staff, which he intended to repair, after which the young master hurried after the phoenix to the exit of the sanctuary, which turned out to be not so easy to do, since the temple was collapsing and huge stones were falling right on them. Meanwhile, Hephaestus went to the other gods, where everyone was waiting for his return. The enraged Fire Lord said that he had lost one of his incarnations, which guarded the mighty phoenix, and now that world is destroyed. The stunned gods demanded that Hephaestus explain what had really happened. After all, they spent so much time and effort to seal the monster in the lost temple. Naturally, they wanted to kill the god since he was unable to keep the demon in his kingdom. However, their patron said that now they needed to focus on the source of the problem. Dolores, in turn, continued to wait for her partner to return. Tao assumed that Night Xiao died because the temple collapsed. But at the very last moment, Yi appeared with a fiery phoenix. The stunned girl noted that he had survived after all, and the guy smiled back, after which she turned her attention to the immortal divine demon. He asked the teenager how he had managed to secure the support of such a powerful monster. Phoenix instantly eliminated most of the fire sharks that continued to approach them. Then he suddenly rose into the air and said goodbye to the young man, saying that he was now responsible for his child. The demon also promised that they would meet again, after which he disappeared in an unknown direction. At the same time, the monster left Xiao's egg. Dolores was simply shocked by what happened. calling him lucky because he not only survived, but also took the baby phoenix with him. He continued to show her his trophies and showed her the blood of the defeated fire god. A puzzled Tao noted that this was the essence of Hephaestus himself, and the young man smiled again. This blood helped him advance in his profession and increased his characteristics. But at the same time, Ebisu also entered a new stage of development, which he personally informed E. At the same time, all abilities, including the magic shield, had been changed for the better. But that wasn't the most important thing, since Xiao could now impose positive effects on his assistants. E began to realize that with these skills, he could help pets evolve to the mythical level. Suddenly the phoenix egg moved, and naturally the teenager and Dolores noticed it. The young man asked her if she saw it move, and the girl answered in the affirmative. Then Night Xiao realized that his level increase had a direct impact on the speed at which the cub was born. And within the next 7 to 2 hours, the phoenix will definitely hatch from the egg. After which they finally hurried away from this unfortunate place. Tao, as always, reminded him about the payment. After a certain amount of time, the protagonist returned to the central city of Fengye with Res. Approaching the mayor's estate, the young master heard the old man's cries. Upon entering, the young beast tamer found Yalan in a rather strange outfit. The puzzled teenager asked what was going on and why they were arguing. The mayor joyfully greeted Night Xiao and called him into his office, where he stated that an extremely unpleasant story had happened with these short people. The old assistant tried to quickly bring him up to speed, and reported that Yalun had asked the dwarves to help rebuild the city. However, they ignored him, and then he made a very strange decision. In despair, he dressed up as rice because the dwarves adored him. The young man noted that this was indeed a rather unusual act on the part of the old man. After which Xiao urged him to take off this ridiculous outfit and promised to solve the problem with the short people. At the same time, Yi understood perfectly well that the gnomes were extremely stubborn, and it would not be so easy to force them to help. Returning to the forge, the boy ran into an angry Thor and greeted him. The old man was shocked by the young man's quick return and began asking him about his journey. After all, he was extremely curious whether he had found the lost temple, and the young man answered in the affirmative. A joyful Thor asked if he could really take them back. Xiao stated that unfortunately, it was not that simple. Because the sanctuary was destroyed, and he only managed to take the staff of the fire god, the dwarf was horrified, and of course recognized this weapon. All the short people, along with Thor, immediately bowed before him, asking him to show the way to their people. After all, if he has this staff in his hands, he is the messenger of the god of flame. Ye decided to take advantage of the moment. In connection with this, he ordered them to stay in the city and restore it to him. Naturally, they could not dispute his demand. Xiao also asked Thor to make some necessary items for him. At this time, the mayor continued to go crazy with his ridiculous ideas. This time he dressed up as a pancake to please the dwarves, which was extremely strange and stupid. A couple of minutes later, a servant came to him and informed him that E had left with the main short one. The bewildered old man asked where they were going, and the boy replied, to rebuild the city. The foolish Yalon declared that it was definitely thanks to his efforts, since it wasn't for nothing that he dressed up as various delicacies. But the assistant stated that in fact, Night Xiao had reached an agreement with them and was able to convince them of the need to rebuild Fengye. The stunned mayor could not understand how the boy managed to make them listen to him. What he didn't know, however, was what exactly the boy had said to the race of short people to convince them. Meanwhile, a delegation from Prince Kalami arrived to see Duchess Sophia. The king's henchmen noted that this Xiao had become too arrogant since they had come to confer a title on him. But the guy didn't even deign to talk to them, and the servant also reminded the princess of his patron's feelings. However, Sharel urged him to tell Kalami that she was absolutely not interested in him. Albert replied that in that case she was putting him in a difficult position. At that moment, E suddenly appeared, who declared that then they had nothing more to talk about. Sophia immediately smiled. She was sincerely glad at the unexpected appearance of her lover, which of course was noticed by the surrounding servants of Prince Kalami, and they began to be cheeky to the guy. Albert continued to provoke the main character, which naturally did not please Sharel. The young master noted that today he was in the mood to kill someone. But Kalami's henchman once again said that for such words, he should be hanged in the square. Without thinking twice, the young tamer of magical beasts dealt him a crushing blow. As a result, the guy collapsed on the floor and lost consciousness. Everyone was horrified. After which Xiao asked who else wanted to object to him. Of course, everyone abstained, saying that there are no problems with Yi's title and that he will soon be granted new lands. Smiling Queen Sharel said that the guy really knows how to solve problems. Soon the program notified all players that Night Xiao had received the title of Viscount of the Longhuang Empire and received lands. The enthusiastic people were shocked that he had managed to reach such heights and unlock the system of possessions. Everyone began to naively believe that in this case he would assemble a team. Naturally, there were many who wanted to do so. The Duchess suddenly informed Ye that since he had convinced the dwarves to stay in the city, many were offering high prices for his shops. Of course, the young man decided to take advantage of the chance to earn some money and went out to the people. Where players began offering exorbitant prices for his holdings, Xiao clearly didn't expect this. The teenager said that he could sell them the trading stalls, but there was one condition. Everyone started to wonder what exactly he was talking about. Yi smiled and replied that he would have to pay extra. This didn't stop those who wanted to, and they immediately dragged in bags of gold. The players literally swarmed around him, trying to win his favor. After collecting huge sums of money from people, Xiao first activated the coin multiplication skill. Thus, he became incredibly rich, and soon rumors about the dwarves spread throughout Fengye. However, he was extremely curious about what foreigners were doing in Jiangcheng. He thought they had come for him, but no one knew what would happen that night. Suddenly, players began to be thrown out of the video game, returning them to the real world, in which this game was transferred. Xiao was waiting for this merger and understood what would happen now. The system immediately offered him the opportunity to choose a skill to extract. Of course, Yi chose the Money Shield ability. Only players above level 10 had this opportunity. At the same time, the game characteristics of his character were also transferred to reality. Then the young man decided to do justice and immediately ran out into the street, understanding that the world will now be plunged into chaos, and some will have a hard time. Meanwhile, people began to realize that the apocalypse had indeed burst into their world. One of them said that tomorrow he would go to the factory to see his boss and give him what he deserved. Others decided to use this enhancement for good purposes, to earn as much money as possible. Thus, absolutely every person could choose a specific skill. In order to use it to do whatever he wanted, complete chaos began. Meanwhile, the main character went to the estate, where he was surrounded by bandits. One of them ordered the young master to hand over all his valuables, threatening him with a knife. Another one walked around him from behind and said that his friend had reached level 11 in the game, and he better be a good boy. The young beast tamer smiled in response and said that there was too much scum in this world. After which he grabbed their leader by the throat and began to slowly squeeze him. Then, having strangled him, he let the guy go. The stunned thugs did not expect such a turn of events. Xiao, in turn, hastened to deal with the remaining bandits, which turned out to be extremely painful for them, because its level was simply incommensurate with Yi's stage of development. At this time, Lin and his friends were having fun in complete peace. Everyone was celebrating the historic moment, as they had invested a huge amount of money into the game and it had paid off. At that moment, Xiao suddenly burst in on them, and everyone immediately froze in place. No one could understand who he was and why he allowed himself to behave like this. He put a mask on his head and said that he had waited so long for this day of revenge. A puzzled Lin asked him who he was and why he was so brave. Then Xiao took off the mask from his face and noticed that he had even forgotten his voice. Of course, everyone recognized him and started saying that Yi should have died in a car accident. Lin himself greeted his brother and stated that if he had come to ask him for money, then he would have no chance. The teenager quickly asked him if he had staged the accident in which his parents died. The brother smiled and noted that he finally dared to ask him about it. His accomplice urged him not to talk about the car accident, and besides, Lin was drunk. Xiao, in turn, jabbed his finger at him with a lightning-fast movement, and the guy fell to the ground. Having said that when he speaks, it is better not to interrupt him, as the consequences will be irreversible. After which he once again called on Lin to tell the truth, so that his death would not be painful. Everyone was terrified by such a strong boy and backed away, realizing that it was better not to joke with him. One of them said that this was the same Night Xiao from the video game Apocalypse. He noted that apparently there were still intelligent people among them, but the others doubted this. Just like Lin, who began to claim that they simply had similar names. After which his brother approached him and brazenly said that it was he who staged that very car accident. He added that he was truly sorry, as he should have also died in that accident. An enraged Xiao replied that he was indeed unworthy of representing their family. Suddenly he laughed and said that today he would send him to his deceased parents. Then he ordered everyone present to kill his brother for a reward of dark gold. However, there weren't many people willing, which made him think. The protagonist said with great confidence that they didn't have the courage to do that. After which, absolutely calmly and naturally, the young master broke Lin's finger. Then he twisted his arm completely, which turned out to be quite painful for him. Everyone just watched what was happening in horror, and didn't even think about standing up to Xiao. The young beast tamer continued to brutally beat his brother in front of everyone. Lin screamed in wild pain, starting to beg Ye to stop this and leave him alone. However, the embittered teenager ignored his pathetic pleas for mercy. In the end, Xiao sent him to his parents so that at least there, he would deign to ask them for forgiveness. It was truly extremely cruel, but the young man could not help but avenge his father and mother. Everyone was literally shocked by what was happening and looked at the guy in horror. However, some approved of Yi's actions, saying that the man had long deserved to die. The others also joined them, knowing full well that it was better to take Xiao's side. But it didn't work on the guy, and he said that no one would leave here alive. After which he began to brutally beat everyone present, despite the fact that there were women among them. Most of them, frightened, declared that they had nothing to do with it, and that Lin had organized it all. But Yi's vengeance knew no bounds, and he ultimately killed everyone who was not lucky enough to escape. Thus, the revenge that had been dragging on for 10 years was finally accomplished at the hands of Xiao. Soon the bloodied teenager left his late brother's estate. Meanwhile, one of the Apocalypse players who fancied himself a god was demonstrating his skills to the fullest, claiming that now no one would dare stand in his way. He was greatly mistaken. But suddenly his henchmen reported that Xiao had reached level 40 and he was not so simple. But the extremely self-confident fighters began to say that the 5 of them would beat him. At that moment, Yi suddenly broke through the wall into the room and calmly entered the room, stating that they could easily check this. Everyone was shocked by the sudden appearance of the young man. The stunned leader of the thugs asked how he found this place. Ignoring his question, Xiao began to deal them crushing blows, having said that they can only attack from behind, even in the video game Apocalypse. Naturally, their strength was incomparable to the teenager, as a result of which they were unable to do anything against him. Soon, Yi beat up the arrogant warriors and set the mansion on fire, then calmly left the estate. He was filled with an incredible feeling. It was a sense of duty fulfilled. After a certain time, law enforcement officers arrived at the scene, but along with them, military soldiers also appeared, which Xiao was extremely surprised about. Not understanding why they had called together an entire army, they hastened to surround the guy. A stunned Yi looked around at them all and asked who they were and what was going on. At that moment, the governor-general of Zhangcheng, named Li Huan, came out to him. He immediately approached the teenager and asked him to talk to him alone. Stepping aside, Huan said sadly that the city had literally plunged into chaos, and so he decided to turn to him for help to restore order to Zhangcheng. Xiao looked at him thoughtfully and replied that he could help, but only on one condition. Soon, news that the young animal tamer had agreed to help the authorities restore justice spread throughout the country. Yaran, stunned by such an unexpected turn of events, could not believe that Yi was the main character of the news. Qin believed that it was all because of Hong, who constantly turned her against him. At the same time, the girl sincerely hoped that one day the young master would return to her. After a certain time, Xiao brought order to the city and even the Apocalypse found out about it. The guy, as always, became a source of discussion for the players who admired him. Soon Ye also returned to the video game, where everyone continued to talk only about him. Ebisu noted that he had become a living legend, but the young man said that he did not need fame at all. Naturally, the teenager decided to visit Thor at the forge, who immediately greeted him. Suddenly, he took out a scroll and asked the dwarf to look at the drawing. The dumbfounded old man never imagined that Xiao would ask him to forge the Divine Beast Lord's claw. Thor noted that if there were enough materials, it would be possible to create an artifact from the same set. Then Ye took out another blueprint of the Divine Beastmaster helmet. Then I asked the old man how long it would take to forge these items. Thor declared that if Durin joined him, they would do everything in 3 days. Xiao replied that in that case he would come to his forge in 3 days for equipment, after which Ye went to the master of taming beasts. The old man did not expect the appearance of such a venerable gentleman. Seeing Ebisu on his shoulder, he noted that it was a unique animal, as befits a true master. Naturally, Su did not like this statement, but he decided to remain silent. Soon he invited Xiao into the house, where they had a friendly conversation about the Fire Phoenix, the release from the shell that he had been waiting for so long, but the elder could not help him in any way. At this time, Green Baby found fresh pears in the basement and began to eat them. They then headed home, trying to figure out how to speed up the process of the Phoenix's appearance. In the meantime, he decided to take a look at the dragon's characteristics, which had increased several times. What the guy didn't expect was that he soon came to the conclusion that waiting 3 days to forge equipment, sitting on the couch, was too boring. Therefore, Xiao went with Green Baby to the 50th level territory, where the dragon rushed to eliminate the stone golems one by one. Yi, in turn, wanted to see his incredible strength, and he demonstrated it to the fullest extent. This was no longer a cub like before, but a healthy dragon that had no equal. After several hours of beating monsters, Green Kid was finally able to increase his level, which was quite difficult to do once you reached stage 40, and the further you went, the slower the experience accumulated. This trend was also noted by players in the central city, who said that Xiao now needed to spend 2 days to level up. Meanwhile, the main character and his beloved pet continued to kill demons. Suddenly, the young master suggested that he go deeper into the valley where monsters also lived. The players couldn't stop discussing the level of the young beast tamer, who was advancing much more slowly, knowing that once they reach stage 40, they will also have to play for months to improve their stats. Meanwhile, Xiao and Green Baby continued to destroy the extremely weak monsters. Suddenly, Ye remembered the phoenix, because it was supposed to hatch any day now. Approaching the egg, he noticed that it had begun to move once again. The teenager eagerly awaited the moment when the fire demon would be born. A moment later, the egg burst into pieces, and the guy immediately jumped back. In its place, a fiery beam suddenly sparkled, indicating the birth of a phoenix. And a couple of seconds later, the young man's most beautiful new pet soared into the sky. Xiao was shocked at how lucky he was to have a divine monster. He had incredible abilities and characteristics. He was even stronger than a level 40 dragon. The cub began to soar through the skies, demonstrating its unique skills, after which Yi began to think about the name of his newly made pet. The teenager decided that Ho would suit him, but the beast began to behave in an extremely strange way. Then Xiao thought that it would be better to keep the name Luo Huang, especially since his father had originally nicknamed him that. The joyful phoenix flew up into the sky again, as if to show how much it liked this name. Suddenly Yi noticed the black fog and did not understand what had happened. The black clouds continued to move towards them, and the young man assumed that they were toxins, which were emitted by poisonous rats, while they inflicted poisoning. Green Baby began to attack them again with his furious flame, but Xiao urged him to fly away from there immediately so that they would not poison the dragon. The rats in turn chased after them. There were a huge number of them. As a result, they were surrounded on all sides and there was nowhere to run. The guy understood that they would still have to fight them, bypassing their poisonous clouds. Yi immediately ordered the phoenix to deal with the annoying beast. Besides, he hadn't seen it in battle yet. The fire monster immediately used its unique ability. Subsequently, incredible damage was inflicted on the rats. The result was impressive. In a split second, the demons burned to ashes, which was not particularly difficult for the phoenix. Then the young man became convinced of the devastating power of his new pet, which simply had no equal. Suddenly, he flew into the air and once again used the skill of mass destruction. A beam of fire instantly rushed into the ground, burning everything in its path. Thus, the teenager was able to increase his level to 43. Players in the central cities once again witnessed the unimaginable success of Knight Xiao. Within a few minutes, the guy moved to the 46th stage of development. Everyone was in shock. Soon the field was strewn with rat corpses, and the protagonist rushed to collect trophies from them. What was Huan's merit? It seemed that the apocalypse had never known such a powerful demon, after which, the young master decided to go deep into the forest to increase his level to 50th. Moreover, with such pets it was not difficult. Suddenly they were again surrounded by poisonous rats. The young tamer of magical beasts summoned the fiery phoenix to attack again. The fiery monster never ceased to amaze its owner by exterminating toxic animals. At the same time, he had a huge number of devastating skills in his arsenal. And in just a few minutes, Luo Huang was able to evolve to level 42. Green Baby, in turn, was at the 48th stage, but suddenly the system sent Xiao some kind of notification, where it was reported that Yi's equipment and weapons were already ready, and he could pick them up. Naturally, the guy rushed back to the central city of Fengye to look at his new outfit. The young man immediately set out on his journey, and soon arrived at the dwarf's forge. Having found Thor, he asked if his set had really been forged. The representative of the short people replied that he personally wanted to show him this work of art. Having given him gloves of incredible beauty, the dwarf noted that they had a hidden function. It consisted in the fact that when putting on equipment, it could be hidden from other players. After which Thor hastened to present him with the helmet of the Beast Lord, which also looked impressive. Upon equipping the divine armor, the set's effect was instantly activated, which increased several characteristics and was an extremely pleasant bonus. Ebisu remarked that he looked terrible in this outfit, but Yi stated that he could hide its appearance. But the most important thing is that the indicators have increased several times. Thanking Thor, Xiao set off on his way again. As the boy passed by the players, he learned that the city of Shuyue had been attacked, and he wondered who could have done it. Su said that they could find out about it personally, but Ye decided to stop by Tao's place first. After some time, a servant came to her and told her about a new visitor. The girl asked him to say that she was not there. However, the teenager was already in her room declaring that she was extremely inhospitable. He also asked what happened in the city of Shuyue. Dolores said that a gray fog attacked it, and it could engulf the settlement. She added that the most evil god was connected with this, which she managed to find out about in one of the chronicles of the Supreme Temple. However, he was not even accepted into the sanctuary, since he spreads various diseases and plague. Understanding why Xiao was questioning her, she urged the guy not to go to Shuyue so as not to get involved with this Sekhmet. But it wouldn't be Yi if he ignored yet another extremely dangerous and exciting journey. So of course he got ready to go, and to his surprise, Tao also wanted to go with him. However, it was necessary to wait some time for Dolores to prepare the teleport. The young man then decided to find out more about this incident, and began to read the latest news about Shuyue. But at the same time, for unknown reasons, passages to several cities were closed, which seemed like a rather strange coincidence, behind which, of course, Sekhmet was behind. Arriving at the place, Tao noted that from here, they could get straight to the outskirts of the city, after which the sorceress activated the portal and said that they should hurry, because in reality the teleport is not stable and can close at any moment. The main character immediately approached the magical gates and finally went inside. Dolores followed the young master, and in a few seconds they found themselves in the wasteland. Where the bridge leading to the city of Shuyu was visible, it was suspiciously quiet. The weather was beautiful, birds were flying carefree everywhere, and a light breeze suddenly arose. But this did not last long, as Tao noticed the gray clouds, which were approaching the outskirts of the city. This was the gray haze that Rez stated. Suddenly, the young beast tamer moved towards Shuyu, and the bewildered girl asked where he was going. Xiao replied that he would go to the city and leave the exploration of the gray mist to her. She didn't argue with this in principle, wishing the teenager good luck. Yi only smiled at her in response. Then he finally headed to the main gate of Shuyue, where silence also reigned. Suddenly, the young man noticed a huge crowd of people leaving the city. Everyone was talking about some miners heading to the lake and the poor girl. Xiao instantly rushed towards one of them and asked who this girl was. The old man asked him in return who he was. Yi showed the badge of the High Temple and said that he was tasked with dealing with the gray haze. Then they told her that Aisha's parents had died from this monstrous plague, and she was left alone. He added that she was in the temple in the Bishwi district, as they had decided to isolate her from society. Another urged the boy to be careful, since even the best doctors did not have a cure for the gray haze. Xiao, in turn, thanked them for their help and went to look for the poor girl, understanding perfectly well that Aisha is exactly the one he needs to find. But at the entrance to the church, he was suddenly stopped by guards and called upon to leave this place. Yi introduced himself as the Viscount of the Empire, and stated that he had been tasked with investigating the source of the gray haze. The guys looked at each other and immediately asked him to kindly come into the temple. Another one informed Lady Sina that a man from the High Sanctuary had arrived to see her. Xiao approached her and said that he should investigate the gray mist on Aisha's body. She also noted that this plague was extremely contagious, and Yi asked if the magic shield was really unable to stop the infection. Sina replied that if the density of the gray haze was too high, a high-level barrier was needed. The teenager breathed a sigh of relief, because he had a divine shield that absorbed absolutely all damage. Entering the girl's room, the young man immediately introduced himself. But Aisha huddled in the corner and ordered him not to approach her, because the Viscount of the Empire could get infected, and then no one would be able to help him. He boldly walked towards her, having first activated the magical barrier, and said that this would not threaten him, after which he asked if she could show him the bottle she was holding. Based on the description of the system, Xiao realized that this particular bottle was the source of the curse, which also began to cause damage to the young man himself. However, in Aisha's hands, it acquired healing properties. The teenager asked where she found this bottle, and the girl immediately thought about it. Then she replied that she had found it near the Griffin Lake, in the western part of the city, where the cave is located. He thanked Aisha and said that she had actually helped him a lot. However, the main character decided to keep the bottle for himself, believing that it might still be useful to him. After which the young master said goodbye to the girl and promised to definitely deal with the black fog. As he left, he was met by a worried Sina who asked if he had any leads. Ye replied that he needed to go to Griffin Lake. The girl noted that it was completely engulfed in gray mist and that it was dangerous, but Xiao said that it was necessary. The system instantly notified the young beast tamer that he had earned 20 points of favor with Sina. While she called him an incredibly brave man, Yi soon headed towards the lake, where he began to take damage. Since the whole sky was covered with black, poisonous clouds, the path was not close. Continuing to walk north, Xiao suddenly noticed strangers. The teenager assumed that these were people from the High Temple and approached them closer. He also noticed Dolores, who was being persuaded by unknown persons to go to the contaminated lake. However, the sorceress refused, stating that it was simply suicide. Ye greeted Tao and asked what she was doing there. The girl was surprised. Having asked him a similar question, the unknown warriors could not understand who this boy was. Rez said that he had to go to Shuyue. Xiao replied that the trail led to this lake. Therefore, he needs to get to the infected griffin swamp as quickly as possible. Stunned strangers commented on his bravery, saying he was overconfident. At the same time, they constantly asked Dolores what they should do next, and whether they should follow Yi. Finally, the sorceress agreed to help Night Xiao because she could not admit defeat. But she urged the warriors to stay here, since they clearly would not survive in such conditions. Meanwhile, the teenager continued walking towards the toxic lake, the damage gradually increasing. Thus, the young man understood that he was already close, and only a few meters remained to go. After a couple of minutes, he finally came to the Griffin Lake, over which black clouds hung. Everywhere in the fields lay dead birds and various animals, killed by the gray haze. The guy slowed down, looking around carefully, realizing that he was on the right track. Soon Xiao discovered a cave and rushed to explore it, where pitch darkness lurked. He slowly descended the stairs, descending into the unknown, which stirred his blood. Finally getting down, he saw a huge number of purple crystal bottles. The young man also found another passage where a red light was on, and of course he became curious. Once inside, the teenager found himself in an unknown room where everything was in ruins. Walking further, Xiao came across another statue of a deity and began to examine it. Yi immediately released Green Baby and Luo Huang, thinking that things weren't that simple. But instead of uninvited guests, the guy saw an altar where another artifact lay. Xiao grabbed it and began to turn it over in his hands, realizing that the object would need to be identified at the first opportunity. Suddenly, the dungeon began to shake, and the stunned young man stepped back. The statue suddenly spoke to him, offering him some kind of test of the Holy Spirit. The guy couldn't even imagine that he could find another test in such a place. Before she could even think about it, Yi suddenly began to be pulled into an unknown portal, after which the teenager was thrown out in the middle of unidentified ruins. Xiao immediately began to look around. In this location, he recognized the Colosseum where fierce gladiator battles took place. Ebisu began to panic, urging the protagonist to find a way out immediately. The unknown voice spoke again that the young master must accept his fate. A moment later, a huge warrior named Abak came out to the young tamer of magical beasts, who was at level 48 and possessed an abundance of devastating skills. Then Xiao finally realized that he had fallen into a trap from which there was only one way out. But since he had no other choice, Yi began to fight the brute. But at the beginning of the battle, the teenager decided to release only the green kid and not disturb the phoenix. Thus leaving him to more dangerous opponents, the dragon immediately began to emit fire. The extremely slow Abak simply could not keep up with such a fast and agile monster. Xiao, in turn, could only watch what was happening, giving a lot of advice to his pet. However, even without his instructions, the green kid dealt with the giant, who was unable to land a single blow on him. As a result, Abak was left with little health and went berserk. At the same time, his strength and defense increased many times over, which could play a key role. Then Yi finally decided to release his secret weapon in the form of a fiery phoenix. The fire demon immediately began to attack the brute. It seemed like he had no chance. But Abak continued to resist, but it led to nothing. And soon the big guy collapsed unconscious to the ground, which Xiao was immensely happy about. Wang Luo also increased his level, which became another reason for celebration, after which Yi hastened to collect the incredible trophies from the body of the defeated monster. The statue of the deity unexpectedly congratulated him on his victory, hinting that this was not the end, adding that the boy faces the true cruelty of the arena of the Holy Spirit. Then another demon of impressive level named Alex suddenly appeared in the Colosseum. Night Xiao stepped back, realizing that this opponent was much stronger than the previous one, which made the work of the Green Baby and the Divine Phoenix much more difficult. Suddenly Alec declared that the man dared to kill her husband and must pay for it with his life, after which she used resurrection magic, and Abacus suddenly came back to life. Yi, in turn, urged his pets to attack her so as not to give her the opportunity to resurrect the brute, because otherwise they might have problems with two monsters. But Green Baby and the Fiery Phoenix instantly dealt with the monster. Having literally incinerated her, Xiao was extremely surprised that the demon did not drop any items. But just as they were about to leave the arena, the huge giant nevertheless resurrected, claiming that he was in fact immortal. The stunned Ye never expected such a turn of events, not understanding how this was possible, since they had dealt with Alec quite quickly. Abak in turn said that he was obliged to take revenge on the man for the death of his wife. The enraged Knight Xiao immediately ordered his magical beast to kill that big guy again, which is what they subsequently began to do, not giving him a chance to escape. After the giant's next death, the main character acquired a couple more things. Among them was an epic dagger, which the young master really liked. The divine statue announced that the warrior would now be able to ascend. Then he called upon the Holy Spirit of the Apocalypse to appear, and for a moment, everything around froze. Suddenly, an unknown monster appeared from underground. Xiao was shocked. The demon stood on a stone pedestal, which reminded Yi of that very altar in the ruins. Where another magical artifact in the form of a plate lay, the teenager immediately headed towards it. After which the young beast tamer picked it up with complete calm, but the monster ordered him to put it back, adding that man has no right to touch a divine object. A moment later, the arena began to fill with gray mist and the guy backed away. However, the green kid rushed towards the unknown warrior, trying to kill him. But at a certain point, he turned aside and began to behave extremely suspiciously. The bewildered young man asked the dragon what was happening to him. Suddenly, the unknown demon fell apart, which was also quite strange. The stunned Night Xiao couldn't understand what had happened to his pet. A couple of seconds later, the same green baby appeared on the pedestal, but his coloring was slightly different. Moreover, his characteristics completely matched Hui's. It was simply amazing. Suddenly, the demon said that the stranger had surprised him and therefore he would die without suffering. Meanwhile, the gray haze began to cause significant damage to the teenager. Xiao then summoned Green Baby to immediately seal his abilities. But the monster said that he would achieve nothing by this, and that death would overtake him anyway. But once Hui blocked his skills, he lost his own skills as well. The bewildered youth instantly released a fiery phoenix, calling on it to teach this demon a lesson. The monster was extremely worried by the sudden appearance of the second pet. Besides, he understood that the magical bird was much stronger than the previous one. The fire monster immediately began to demonstrate its unique abilities. He summoned thunderbolts, followed by a furious flame, which he doused the enemy dragon with. Green Baby also rushed towards the enemy, trying to deal him a crushing blow, which he managed to do extremely successfully, and he literally tore it apart. The dying demon said before his death that they dared to insult the deity, adding that they would definitely meet again, since it was not the end yet, which Yi strongly doubted. Suddenly, an unknown voice thanked the teenager, saying that he had finally driven out Sekhmet. Suddenly, a crystal appeared in front of him, and a voice declared that it was the key to ascension, and if one day he steps onto the path of deity, he will be able to easily break through to the next level. Forced teleportation also began unexpectedly, because the test was passed. At this time, Dolores and her warriors noticed that the clouds began to thicken, and the fog became heavier. One of them suggested that the boy might have died, but Tao was sure of the opposite, and after a couple of minutes, the black fog seemed to evaporate, which they immediately noticed. At that moment, the smiling protagonist appeared in front of them and called out to Dolores. The stunned sorceress said that Xiao was as alive as ever. The girl also asked how he managed to disperse the clouds of gray gloom. The guy replied that he had destroyed the statue of the deity, which left Tao in shock.